Good evening, everyone. It's nice to have all of you here, and it's nice to have such a curious, such an engaged group of people who are participating at. If you're in India, joining in from India in the evening on a Sunday evening. If you're elsewhere, you're still participating on Sunday, and that's taking out time from your own personal time. So thank you all. And we really appreciate the fact that you are driven towards sustainability and youth activities. So let me start without wasting any time and give you a brief snippet of what we are doing today and what's the point of all of this. So today what we have lined up is a 3-segment discussion, if you will. The first segment is the panel discussion where we have some of the leaders in their industry joining us, and they are talking to us about their experiences with sustainability, with youth engagement, and so on. That's going to happen right now. So we have Mr. Anirban Ghosh, Mr. Vidyut Mohan, and we'll soon be joined by Ms. Gayatri Raghva. So those are our 3 panelists. After the first segment, this panel discussion that goes on for about an hour from now, we'll be starting with our first lecture on game theory in conservation, which is where we apply principles of systems thinking, principles of public policy in conservation and sustainability. And that's our first lecture. The second lecture will start right after that, about an hour and 15 minutes after that. And that would be taken by me. And there I would be discussing the economics of the beneficiary-based principle, which is often discarded as something that is not as important, but more and more we're realizing that all international negotiations at the environmental table are cruxed around the beneficiary-based principle. So how do the economics of that work? What is the point of all of this? This as you all know, is a no-cost workshop. And the reason we are doing this is because we think that at EnviPol and at the Global Policy Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship, we think that youth engagement in sustainability, youth awareness in sustainability, youth training in sustainability is the only way where we can avert the crisis that we're already in. So enough with the introductions about what is to be done today. Let's start with the introductions about people who would be speaking with us and bringing in their experiences and helping us discover what sustainability really is. So the reason why we have called it a stakeholder panel discussion is because we have stakeholders from different parts, different arenas, different professional backgrounds, and different age groups at this panel. It also brings me a lot of a pleasure to introduce the kind of stalwarts that we have. Irrespective of their age, they have made changes and they have impacted lives of so many people. So that being said, let me first welcome Mr. Anirban Ghosh, who's with us. Anirban, I'm sure those of you who are driven towards sustainability have probably caught a glimpse of him in one of the workshops or have read about him. So Anirban leads the sustainability at the 20 billion Mahindra Group, $20 billion Mahindra Group. Under his leadership, Mahindra has developed an award-winning sustainability framework, become the first to have a certified carbon neutral factory in India, doubled energy productivity in a company, and enabled 21 locations to become zero waste to landfill. So now you know that we're talking about sustainability in real terms and not just the theory of it that we usually see. Moving on. He has, in partnership with the World Bank, facilitated the creation of the Sustainable Development Housing Leadership Consortium to accelerate the spread of green buildings in Asia. Anirban has led a shared value project that doubled per capita income for 50,000 people in rural India. Anirban takes great pleasure in implementing projects that drive positive change in society and has been acknowledged as a thought leader and a distinguished sustainability officer. Thank you so much, Anirban, for being a part of this panel. I hope that we have constructive discussions, and if you're able to take a few droplets of your knowledge, I think we'll be better off. Thank you, Anirban. Moving on, as I said, we'll also be joined by our third panelist, Ms. Gayatri Raghva. But before, till she joins in, let me go to Vidyut Mohan. I'm extremely proud to have Vidyut here. I was telling Vidyut how how we were keen on having him as well. Now, for those of you who do not know, Vidyat Mohan is the co-founder and CEO of Takachar, a social enterprise enabling farmers to prevent open burning of their waste from farm residues and earn extra income by converting the residues into value-added chemicals like activated carbon on site. Passionate about energy access and supporting rural livelihoods, Vidyat became interested in biomass energy, chemical development due to its untapped potential and close association with farmers. After initial exploration and research for his master's thesis at TU Delft, he returned to India to work with village communities in the Himalayas to convert pine needles waste into a marketable carbon-based product. This work led him to discover a way to dramatically scale farm residue utilization through technology, as well as to support farm-based livelihoods, which led to the formation of Takachar. In the past, he has worked with Simpa Networks, where he developed solar home systems, system offerings and finance plans for households and small businesses in rural India. Now, Vidyut has been making all of us proud, especially if you are from India. Vidyut is a 2019 Echoing Green Fellow and was awarded the UN Young Champion of the Earth Award for 2020. So it is a pleasure to have you here, Vidyut, and I'm very excited for the conversations that we're going to be having in the next hour. All right. What I'm going to be doing as we await Ms. Gayatri to join us is I'm going to open the panel discussion, and I'm going to be discussing with our panelists and trying to gather as much as we can from them. And I'll first go to Vidyut because Vidyut, I'm sorry, but we're following age, so you come in the first any which way. So what we're going to be doing is I want to come to you, Vidyut, and understand from your perspective, given your age, since I've already mentioned it, is it something, being a youth leader in sustainability, pursuing sustainability as a career, are still things that are, not looked at as full-time vocations, especially in the East, but, even globally so. So as someone who has experienced it, who's gone through these, I'm assuming, various thought processes where you're discussing and doing a CB of whether you should pursue this as a serious vocation. Was it an easy decision, and is it something that is replicable? What was the thought process of taking environment-based profession and creating a difference there?
Thanks so much, Ishan, for having me and being part of this esteemed panel. And hi to Anirban and Gayatri as well. And thanks so much for that lovely introduction and also. So for me, if I reflect back on my journey, it's very hard to pinpoint that one moment where I decided that I want to, be in sustainability. I think a lot of it has to go with just my upbringing and experiences while growing up. But there were some, key moments or key points where I witnessed certain things that did help me make decisions at that point in time. I would say, just based on my journey in college, during my undergrad, during my master's, and even after that, at that point in time, it wasn't at least during my undergrad in mechanical engineering, I was one of the few in my college who was venturing into this field. So it was like, at that point in time, it really struck me that, okay, I'm doing something very different. Am I doing something wrong? Right? I was full of self-doubt. Yeah. That point in time, that everyone's, going to the traditional route of, the job market at that point in time, right? And I just kept thinking, okay, I'm not probably on the right track. But what did help me at that point in time was speaking to a lot of other young people who ventured onto this path and just witnessing their story. So these were other entrepreneurs who I got to meet and speak, not only from college, but also from during internships. And also I just reached out and just heckled a lot of people to try to understand why they are doing what they're doing. And I think that got me to realize that, I mean, this is a no-brainer. One has to enter this field, and every job from here on has to adhere to these principles. I mean, otherwise that business or that organization is not going to survive in the long run. It has to, I mean, whatever the definition of sustainability is, right? From our discussion from a climate point of view, that organization has to follow those principles. Otherwise, that organization will not exist. So it's a no-brainer, and I think, I mean, it's every field will mold into this area.
All right. So actually, that's a very interesting point of discussion. And Anirban, again, we're very happy to have you here, because almost all of these questions are questions that you hold an expertise in. So there is this inherent dichotomy when you look at, because Vidyut was talking about how it is almost a given that you have to enter this sector now with the current climate and every climate, both metaphorically and literally, with the current climate that is surrounding us all. Now, there's an element of social impact in sustainability as well. And I know that the Mahindra Group has been doing a lot, but I just wanted to draw I just wanted you to draw from your experiences of how there's this perceived inherent dichotomy between, the private sector, they're going for development, and, that's not driven towards sustainability. And I know that, the Mahindra Group has kind of changed the conversation there. But from your experience, have you also seen this change of perspective from the corporate sector, and how they have been contributing a little more? Has this always been there, but it's just visible now due to better reporting? How does it work?
Ishan, sometimes the popular conversation hides the real truth. So I know the corporate sector is a whipping boy at various times for various reasons. But why does the corporate sector exist in the first place? Can you imagine a world without the corporates, a sustainable world without the corporate sector? Would we have jobs? Would we have food to eat? Would we have a good lifestyle? It's a rhetorical question. Now, the corporate sector, to be successful, has to address what the world needs. So if at a certain point in time the world needs penicillin, corporate sector must address it. If you need toothpaste, you must address it. And today you need to have technologies that are low carbon, so the corporate sector must address it. So it's not as if the corporate sector is not interested in sustainability. For its own sustainability, it has to be interested in sustainability. What has happened over time is that new requirements have evolved for the world to be sustainable. And the new requirement, one of them, is to make sure that we are following a low carbon path of development, adopting low carbon technologies, because we know that we have this big problem of too much carbon dioxide in the air, leading to warming, leading to a whole bunch of other things. So without corporate sector pitching in, this problem is not going to be solved. And we have already seen that because of robust action, we have been able to solve, let's say, the LED problem, or we are pretty much solved the solar energy problem. We are on the way to solve the electric or the clean mobility problem. So we already have solutions for the green construction problem. We just need the right policies to make sure that green construction becomes normal. So one mustn't get carried away by the popular perception, but look at things from first principles and say, okay, so what is the role of the corporate sector? In fact, I was very intrigued by the question you asked, Vidyut, and I was wondering, so why am I in this anyway? And I looked up those circles of Ikigai. And I think Vidyut is in a wonderful position where he's doing something which the world needs. He's doing something which he loves. I guess he's doing something which he's great at. And he has figured out a way of getting paid for it. This is the best possible place you can be. And in the corporate sector, anybody working in sustainability or CSR is probably in that space. it's a wonderful space to be. So believe me, corporate sector believes in sustainability, has no choice but to do so, and must contribute for us to solve the climate problem.
Absolutely. And that raises a couple of very, very interesting points. And that also brings us to the point of the main crux of this discussion today of how to get youth more involved. And right on cue, we're joined by Gayatri. Gayatri was having some trouble because all of our participants were already in the queue, so even the panelists could not get through. I do apologize, Gayatri, for the trouble that was caused to you. But the good thing is, Gayatri, that I have waited for you to be here to start with your introduction, because that is one of the most fun things that people are put through these days. I'm obviously being sarcastic. No one really enjoys it, but I'm going to go over your introduction so that our audiences also appreciate where you're coming from. And then I'll put the question to you that Anirban has kind of mentioned. So for all of you in the audiences, you have probably heard of Gayatri if you're a member of the youth and working in sustainability. Gayatri has been one of the most active voices about youth education, sustainability. She serves as an environmental education consultant for UNEP India office, that's United Nations Environment Program India office. Now, Gayatri lived in Abu Dhabi, UAE for 27 years and moved to her home country, India, during 2016 to be with her family. She also serves, apart from being an environmental educational consultant with the UNEP India office, she also serves as honorary executive director at Wild Ecolog, an organization that is committed to providing real sustainability experiences to youth and to target audiences. She has received several accolades for her contribution to environmental education over the years. Recent one in 2018. I think some of us might have heard of this because this also made the news, being the outstanding environment educator in the global category by the North American Association for Environment Education. So I have, if I have to do justice to Gayatri's profile and introduction and her experience, it'll take me the rest of the 45 minutes. So I'll just cut that short and come to you, Gayatri, with a couple of questions that I have lined up for you. So both Vidyut and Anirban have kind of spoken about their aspects of sustainability. Vidyut has spoken about how, as a member of the youth, you can pursue this as a vocation. And while it might be hard to do a cost-benefit analysis, and I'm trying to bring in as many environment and sustainability terms during the conversation as I can, you still have no other option but to join this vocation because, quite simply, the world might need it. Anirban has spoken about how this dichotomy is often ill-placed of how the private sector has to be looked at as being anti-sustainability, and how he has made a point as to how private sector is actually needed for sustainability to succeed at every level, and that has been happening ever since industrialization, or even before that, if you want to go into the Chanakyas of the world. So, Gayatri, I want to come to you, and I want to ask you, because you have worked extensively in this sphere about youth engagement, about environment sustainability. How do we see the youth as change makers? One, this is more pertinent because we have a bunch of the older generations who haven't done as much. So how do we put all of our eggs in that basket of youth? One. Secondly, how do you encourage them to do something with those eggs? So how do you achieve those two targets in terms of youth engagement? How do you push them towards it through education, skill training, so on and so forth? And how do you instill that drive about sustainability? How it could be taken up as a profession, maybe as a way of life, if it could be.
Thank you, Ishan, and apologies for joining in late. And as I was waiting in the room basically, and I was getting impatient because it kept on coming back that the capacity is full. So anyway, that also tells me that so many people are there today with you, and I am so very happy that so much of audience is there. I think that is what matters. And now coming into your question, environment education. I've been with the environment education now over 4 decades, I should say. around 43, 44 years. And then when we talk about environment education, there was a time where we had to really struggle as environment educator, going to schools, trying to push the whole, environment education. They'll say, why? But we really don't have time. We have to teach the basic math, etc., etc. These are the subjects that we are teaching. They always thought that environment education is some kind of an extracurricular activity, something like a dancing or a debate or something. And then, if we have the time, we believe in extracurricular activity, but when we have the time, now we have exam, now we have this, now we have that. So
it's more of a hobby. It's more of a hobby.
There was a time when I started, I used to sit outside principal's room, school principal's room for 3 hours, 4 hours, just trying to get into the principal's room to tell him that environment education is a part. All education is environment education. There is nothing like an environment education. All education is environment education, is about the environment, right? And we keep talking about, we keep saying, so is this a fault of the education system or what? There is a fault in education itself. What we educate students about, how we educate, how we build up their worldview. Because if you really look at it in that manner, environment is a part of everything that we do. And so, if you build it in that manner, if you build up a worldview and a perception of students in that manner, you don't have to separate out environment and nature education separately from what you do every time. So it used to be really tough trying to convince them that, environment education is extremely important. The only thing I think it attracted them was that I used to go visit the schools when I started doing this thing in a nature bus. So I had this nature bus, it was a very small little mini van where you had these taxidermy specimens that I used to travel. So I used to say, hey, because I was in UAE, so I used to say, I'm getting the desert into your classroom, or I'm getting the sea into your classroom. And so let's have fun with these animals and let's talk to them, etc., etc. I think that attractiveness or whatever it is, that was the point that, okay, let us sort of bring her in. But nobody ever took environment education seriously in the past. But I think there has been a lot of credit to a lot of environment educators all over the world. I think we've been really, really struggling. And now I think the struggle days are over. Vidyut is there right in front of me. And I don't think that, I don't need to do that kind of a struggle anymore. Students today are naturally more inclined towards environment. I've had a lot of interactions with students. To answer to your question, the first question is whether students form large percentage of population. If you look at the youth population, I think the youth bulge, we need not talk about it. The world has a youth bulge. India has a youth bulge. Youth constitute a very, very large part of the population, right? Having said that, makes sense to target youth. And if you're going to be sitting here talking about sustainability, and me, like with my white hair, sitting about making plans 10 years since what should happen, that doesn't make sense because I'm not going to be around. It's the youth who are going to be taking the leadership position. So they need to be included. They are a very important stakeholder when we talk about sustainability. How can we not get youth in when we plan? How can we are making plans, we even make 2030, whatever, 2040, 2050 plans, but where is the youth? We've got to make them sit in the table with us because it's them who is going to take that 2030. They're going to be around at that time to see whether the plan worked or it did not work. We now make a plan, we invest a lot of money, invest a lot of effort in all of that, but it's they who are going to do it at the later stage. So that makes sense to have them on board with you, on the table, planning with you. So that is number one. And I think we have the whole youth movement as far as environment education is concerned has moved a long way in all these 4 decades that I've been talking about. Today, the youth are so aware. They are really aware. They're raring to go. They are concerned. They are angry. They're really angry at what is being done to Earth. And it's being done by people like me, who in our 50s and 60s or 70s, we thought that we could conquer everything around us. Man was the supreme kind of a thing was there. We can do anything and everything kind of a thing. So that, the typical controversy of man over nature. So that's like my generation, which thought at that point in time, we can sort of score over everything kind of a thing. But now the youth are angry and justifiably so. They are angry. They are concerned. They are confronted with a lot of crises, whether it is, we're talking about climate. I think climate action, climate crisis is staring at your face. COVID is staring at your face. We are experiencing the tragedy that we are having it. We should not forget it's a zoonotic disease. It came in because we messed with the environment. It came in because all the habitats were getting destroyed. Most of these have jumped from animals to human, and that's because we messed with the environment. So we cannot, all the students are aware, only the oldies are not aware. The students are aware, the youth is aware. So, and coming to your question as change makers, they, you know, we always follow youth. Youth have a lot of power. Even me, I would like to dress as youth, right? Because I feel maybe I will look years younger, right? So we always follow youth in everything. Youth set the trend in the world. They have the energy, they have the innovativeness, they have the creativity, and they have the boldness or you know, they're brave, they're bold. Yeah, the go try out. Just think out of the box, do something. They can just question everything that is the norm, the conventional norm. And that is what is needed now. Thinking out of the box, going out of the way, doing things that you're not, you know, people like me will never do because we prefer the safe course. Yeah. Right? So we need people like that. So youth are ready. And I think we've been doing a lot of programs, and the program that I've been involved with, whether I'm still involved with the UAE programs and other programs as well. And I see youth today, whether you talk about universities have now, the sustainable campuses have started. There's a lot of programs which are going in the university. Only what is right now lacking is giving that structure, the system, and the support. You have the population who are ready, already set to go, but they need a platform, they need support, they need someone to push them. So and that's where I think, you know, we need to do our bit.
So Gayatri, I think a couple of very good points, and I'll come to you because I'd love to learn more about this, and I'm sure my audience, all the audiences are as engaged because these are some very relevant points. It just reminds me of, because when you were speaking about why youth and you were answering how we must follow, how we end up following them. And I'm not counting myself as a youth here, but one of the things that we have to, one of the things that I teach in my postgrad or undergrad classes when I teach environmental law or environmental policy is that how climate or natural resources around us should be treated the same way you treat your inherited ancestral property, because you would not like it if your father or your grandfather has absolutely decimated it, and you would also want it to be upkept so that you can give it in the same state as you inherited it. So that's why youth is the one that we have borrowed everything from, and we have to give it in the state that we got it from. So a couple of very good points that it also intrigues me, and probably I could come to Anirban here because Gayatri also spoke of how there has been a change over the years. And even in Anirban 15-20 years back when I was fresh out of a good university and I was looking for jobs, I remember that the sustainability departments of corporates usually used to circulate between HR personnel, and they'd be kept in the sustainability department for a couple of years, and then they'd be put back into the HR. That was just a formality. More and more now we're seeing that there are specialized studies, and recruitment happens for people who specialize in environmental audit and environmental design, as you mentioned right at the beginning. Has the perception of the industry also changed towards valuing experts that come with an environmental profile?
Yes, of course, Isha. There are many more roles and many more specializations today. But as Gayatri was speaking about the experience of an environment educator and the principal, I was thinking of the sustainability champion and the senior management of the company. The story was pretty much the same at some point in time. As you talk about these new specializations that are coming up in the field of environment, sciences, engineering, whatever it happens to be, within a company, the possibility of sustainability departments being very large and therefore lots of sustainability jobs, I don't think that's the right way to go. Within a company, it is important that sustainability get embedded into every function, and that the principles of sustainability are practiced by the practitioners of each function. So let's take an example. If you are heading a factory today and you are not adopting principles of energy efficiency to the extent that it is possible today, which wasn't possible 20 years ago maybe, then you're not being a very good manufacturing person. If you're a manufacturing person today and you are not conscious of what wastes you're sending to landfill or how you are causing pollution, then you are not a good manufacturing person today, right? You actually have an opportunity to create value from what you would otherwise call as waste. So in every function, and we could take examples one by one, depending on the industry you're in, there is a role that sustainability can play in making you a better professional. And that's the way sustainability gets practiced in a good organization. Yes, you do need a core set of experts to trigger the right questions, to trigger the right capabilities, perhaps even build capability within the organization, or bring in the awareness that, okay, there are new possibilities in the way I go about becoming a successful professional in the supply chain or in manufacturing or in finance or in marketing, as the case may be. So there is a role the sustainability folks play, but an organization succeeds when sustainability gets embedded into every single function. That leaves the consultants who do all the things you mentioned.
Yeah.
And they are necessary in the ecosystem to make sustainability work in the corporate ecosystem.
I was kind of expecting a bit of a jab at consultants, but I'm glad that you said that they're necessary in the ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely. They have a very important role to play. And before I finish this question, it would be right to introduce into this conversation something that the founding father of the Earth Day, Gaylord Nelson, had said. And he said that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around. And this is probably why Gayatri was saying that whatever you're teaching is actually related to the environment. But if you don't understand how environment plays a part, maybe you're not teaching right anymore.
That's absolutely brilliant. And for those of you who are interested in what Anirban just spoke of, remember the third segment of today's workshop is about exactly that, the economics of beneficiary pays principle and environment. So do wait around till that happens. There's still some way to go, and we have the pleasure of having such distinguished guests. And I must not get greedy. I must also announce that we will be opening the chat box in about 5 minutes. So you can also write in your questions, and we'll take up how many ever we can, time permitting. So I just wanted to put that out there. But given the fact that Anirban also mentioned the importance of economics, one, how it is almost a subset of environment and not the other way around, of sustainability and not the other way around, but also waste. And I have to come to Vidyut because Vidyut, a very important part of Takachar and also various things that you have done in your journey through Takachar is the social impact point that I was making right at the beginning, that you have somehow managed to merge waste, kind of revamp the concept of waste as it not being waste in the first place. And through that, you have had social impact, whether it be with the rural folks or the farmers or so on and so forth. So give me a little bit of an insight of how receptive are people when you take this as a concept, or how receptive are the folks who are, one sort of embedding is what Anirban mentioned, that sustainability should be embedded in corporates. But there is also a culture of waste that is embedded in our general population across sectors. So how receptive are people when you do, and how difficult is it to convince them to, going for something that is greener, or, even if that costs money, at least in the short term?
Right. Yeah, so let me just, I guess, qualify that answer on the basis of two questions, two segments. So for a country like India, the idea of, just, solving for the climate catastrophe or climate change is not enough. It may apply to richer countries, but in India, we also have, we also, the population needs to get richer. A lot of people need to move out of poverty. So it's imperative that whatever climate solution that we think of also takes along all of these people together as stakeholders and leads to improvements in their lives as well. And that's how any large scale climate related solution needs to be thought of. And to answer, and that's why, even for for a business like ours, right? People are the waste problem, and people are doing what they're doing. It's because there's no value proposition for them to act in any other ways. It's they're not bad people as such. So you have to create that value proposition in whatever innovation that you're doing. The basics of business, the fundamentals of business apply even here as well. You have to have that value proposition for each and every stakeholder in your value chain of a business that you're creating, for them to kind of, for you to incentivize them to behave in that particular way. And only then will you be able to do that. And in our case, we think of ways in which how farmers can be incentivized to create value from their own waste instead of, say, burning them, and which can lead to extra income for them. And we work backwards from that pain point and try to create the entire business model around it.
All right. Okay, so that's very interesting because, that's kind of the missing piece of the puzzle, because almost every time you think of a solution and then you go about how that solution can be applied elsewhere, but you are looking at your audience first and then deriving a solution out of it as to how social impact can be done through sustainability. So that's actually a very interesting way to look at it. Sorry, Vidyut, were you saying something?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add to that point. I think that's a great point that you made. And for us as well, we spent a couple of years just trying to understanding the problem, and once you've understood the problem better, really, once you've understood the problem, that is the source of everything behind that. You can get the skills that you need to solve the problem. You can get the motivation to solve the problem, right? And you can think of ways of addressing the problem in a much more impactful way than going with the solution first. So I think, that should be the first step before everything else.
All right. So with it, it reminds me of an anecdote from a couple of days back. I was delivering a guest lecture at a university, and not an Indian university. This was a California-based university. I don't want to name it since this is recorded and going live. But one of the questions that was asked to me was, why would I want to, and I'll come to Gayatri with this question because, she's the in-house resident expert of youth, environment, education, all of those things. So one of the questions that was asked to me, Gayatri, was, why should I pursue environment as a professional course when I can do a separate degree in humanities? I can do, a separate degree, I can do engineering and do a major in, environmental engineering or geosciences, or if I'm doing liberal arts, I can do something in environmental sustainability. So we have spoken about the good things about that are happening to, this public perception, youth perception about sustainability. And I must also give credit, because I was speaking with Dr. Christina Voigt recently, who drafted the Paris Agreement, and I must bring in the Paris Climate Agreement. It gets a lot of flag for not being enforceable per se, but I think it has also led conversations to grow on the climate change front. But having said that, there are still major challenges in youth either taking it up as a professional course or youth taking environmental education as their know-it-all, be-it-all. So what are some of these major challenges, and how do you think we could overcome these, both in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of general youth engagement, irrespective of what you're dealing with? So sustainability or otherwise.
Ishan, first of all, I'd like to say that keeping environment only as an environmental course for the students, you're going in a specialized environmental course, actually limits your action. Sustainability is not a destination. It's a journey. In my opinion, it's a journey and it's a view. It's a perception. It's a worldview. If we have it in that manner and move in that manner, which essentially means everybody in this earth, every person on the earth has to have that view. So regardless of, we just had this conversation, with a lot of youth looking at what is happening at the university level to the issue of sustainability or environment. So there was this question, oh, we all have to study. I don't know if you're aware that Supreme Court had said that you have to have the basic
every graduation course
on environment. And the students actually got up, and there were professors, deans, everybody sitting. Students got up and they said, yeah. And then they give us a PDF document and they just want us to quickly skim through it and pass. They're not interested. They're not interested in any action. They just want to show that they have done some kind of an environmental study at the course. So you can see that the students are ready for action, right? And it is not necessary that, when even the question of green jobs, what is green jobs? I mean, are we just going to have these kind of, every job to me can be green, as Anirban keeps saying. We talk about a whole institution approach when we talk about universities or school. Don't go and teach one thing and think that you have done anything on sustainability until your school operates in a sustainable manner. You integrate sustainability into your curriculum and you see everything with a sustainability lens. Everything should be connected to sustainability. If you don't do that, you're not going to achieve anything anywhere close to it. You can't just do one thing and see. So when coming back to your question, if you're going to have very specialized course, that actually limits the whole thing. It really limits the action because you want everybody. And you remember the conversation I used to have? I said, we don't need to have just one or two intelligent person in my classroom who's a smart kid there. No, I want it to be a collaborative thing. Until unless it's a collaborative action and everybody comes on board, until we target that critical number, critical mass, whether it's youth or whether anybody else, you're really not going to achieve any transformation that we are thinking of, right? That comes only with that. So having said that, I think every job, either you need to have a green perspective, green lens through which you see things. I mean, I remember even in UAE, when we used to go to these offices and they used to say, oh, let's do the sustainability report. They have to do the sustainability reporting there. And so they were a part of, you had 2 or 3 specified people doing the sustainability reporting. I said, no, everybody in your office should be a part of it. Yes, 3 people can do the donkey's work, sit and write, put the document, put everything in the right manner and everything, but everybody has to contribute to it. And if everybody in your office they don't save the paper, they're not going to be conscious about the waste, they're not going to be conscious about the water, then the institution as such or the company as a whole cannot achieve what they want to achieve. So I think there has to be I'll just recall one small little thing. We used to run the Sustainable Schools, Sustainable Campus Initiative in the UAE. And then there was this school where the students were trying to tell the plumber in the school, this is many, many years back, that we need to save the water because the flush really takes a lot. You had very modern flushes which had a lot of water, not the twin flushes at that point in time. So then the plumber was asked by the students to put that bottle of water, how you can fill it with sand and then put it on the tank and then the water will not flush to the full thing. So there will be, the water consumption will become less. So the plumber was taught by the students. The plumber did the same in 10 other schools where also he was doing plumbing. So it's about, I really believe in it. It's sustainability, education, environment, jobs. Every job is a green job. You got to just think in that manner. And we need it because the climate change, you talk about climate change and climate action. Why all this? We had this conversation. It's such a complex thing. Unless you simplify climate change to people, for them to understand what can you do to counteract the climate change? How do you adapt yourself? How do you help us tackle this climate change? Unless you make it simplified. If you're going to have these climate experts, environment experts, and all the experts, yes, they are needed, I will never say no. We need experts everywhere, but we need the larger number of people to understand it and help the experts to do whatever they need to do. So, I mean, I think environment has to get integrated everywhere.
I think
All curriculum, all levels.
that's actually a very good point, and I think that's it also resonating with what Anirban earlier said, that it is not important to have specialized sustainability officers. It is important, but it's also about how you embed the culture of sustainability in the overall organization. But Gayatri, my counter, if I may, usually is that, and I take, when I'm speaking about this, I take the example of the 1940s, 90s, 50s, actually a little earlier than that. And medicine then was MBBS. You've become a doctor if you've done MBBS. And then people realize that, wait, there's a heart, and there's a nervous system, and there's a kidney, and there's or bones. And you started specializing in cardiology and in neurology, nephrology, orthopedics, all of those things. So maybe unless we do have a certain dedicated study towards environment, and this is coming from someone who did law and then chose environmental law as a specialization. So obviously I might be biased there, but I just argue sometimes that it might be best to have specialized studies as well, because unless a person is only occupied by sustainability questions and not doing a major in them separately, but I completely agree with you when you say that there is a necessity to have sustainability in youth institutions and academic institutions and private sector institutions, so on and so forth. So I think we are, by our scheduled time, we have about 3 minutes left. Yes, Anirban, did you have a point there?
I was wondering if I'm allowed to throw in a question and offer the answer.
Absolutely. Those are the best sort of questions.
So we talk about sustainability and the need to be sustainable. What is hidden in this conversation is, why does the lack of sustainability happen in the first place? Why have we got here? And to my mind, there are 4 things that come to my mind. Maybe there are others. First is the inherent belief, shall we say, that nature is limitless. Whatever you do to nature, it will still continue in its own merry way and give things back to you.
Yeah.
You can see I think we are learning the hard way that there are boundaries. So that's the first one, that nature has boundaries. That's one. Second, while this is not a belief, it is more of a practice. All people don't have to be treated well all the time. This leads to all sorts of social problems. And this is something that mankind has done very naturally over time, without having been told, whatever the reasons may be. Third, if nobody is watching, you don't have to do the right thing.
That's true.
Right?
I think everyone has been there.
And lastly, technologies are God's gift to mankind. The realization that it could have unintended negative consequences is not something we ever thought about, but we are facing them today because of emissions and pollution and various other things. So to my mind, these 4 inherent reasons, things we took for granted, which were sort of embedded in the way we lived our lives. Nature is limitless. All people don't have to be treated well all the time. If nobody is watching, you don't have to do the right thing. In fact, these 3 probably lead to ESG, solutions to these 3.
Yes, that's correct.
And technologies are God's gift to mankind, no unintended consequences. This thing that was kind of incipient in society probably leads to all the sustainability or lack of sustainability that we deal with today.
I think those are excellent points. And Anirban, I'm surprised that you're talking about this, because one of the lectures I deliver is exactly that in a nutshell. So now I'll have to change my lecture, because if it can be summed up in 5 minutes, then I'm probably not doing justice to it by delivering it for 1 hour. But
you're the prof, you should take 1 hour. I can apply to become your research assistant.
It would be absolutely my pleasure. I mean, we should pitch it to an international institution sometime. We have Gayatri who wanted to make a point, and I think Vidyut also had a point there.
Yeah. One thing is that we talk about, like, you know, I basically believe we got into a lot of problem because we keep going into a specialized, as we keep talking, you know, in a reductionistic approach, go down, 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 this specialist, that specialist, that specialist, that specialist. And then we lose the whole sight of the wholeness of the you know, this problem that we are tackling. So essentially what I feel is, you were talking about, you know, how, as you were telling me just some time back, that as you go into it, you want a little more, you know, detailed. You want to there is no reductionistic approach here. You need to have, it's like the medical sciences. You keep becoming expert of your ear, and then you don't know, you forget that ear is a part of the whole body, and then the body, then if you're not going to have a holistic healthcare, then the same applies to the environment. If you're not going to do the holistic thing, then if you're going to have a reductionistic approach, then it doesn't get you anywhere to solving the problem, because it's the view, it's the whole view of how you perceive environment, how you perceive sustainability. What is your journey? It's not some kind of a destination that, okay, I take a bus and I will reach there, or I go to a supermarket, I pick it from there, you know, some kind of a thing. And then there, you know, the sustainability issue is solved.
Unless it's a nature bus, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Unless, as I said, sustainability is what you believe in, what you perceive. It's your reality as you look at it, right? So if you don't look at it in a holistic manner, then it might not, you know, reach anywhere. So we can't make it too specialized. If you keep making it too specialized, that's why we lose the bus most of the time. I mean, that's my perception of it. But I'll give the floor to Vidyut to go ahead.
I must say that the time constraint is really demoralizing, because I want to have so many more conversations on these topics. But we'll go to Vidyut, and then we'll take one question. And I know that all of our panelists are very busy, and obviously these are uncertain times, and we have families to tend to as well. So we must appreciate the time. So Vidyut, anyway, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I'll quickly make the point that more than anything else, sustainability is a way of life. So you have to practice it in your own life. And only if you do that, will that translate to anything else, such as business or even things like career choices, etc. And if I have to boil down sustainability to just one action, it is a choice of prioritizing needs over wants. So, you know, you have various choices in various decisions that you make on a daily basis. So, for example, do you actually need to buy that iPad, for example, in addition to your laptop that you already have? Do you actually need to do that, or do you want to buy that? Do you actually need to buy another car for your family when you already have one? Or do you actually want to buy that car for some other reason? So, I mean, and it goes with various actions or various decisions that you have to take every minute of your life almost. And, you know, I'm not saying that we have to do a life cycle analysis for each of those decisions, but it's you know, choosing needs over wants is what I would say sustainability is. And that needs to be taught to children from a very young age, in school and at home. And that's how they'll grow into responsible adults in the future.
That's a brilliant point, Vidit. I remember the quote. I don't know if it is actually Mahatma Gandhi's quote, but you know, there's the earth gives us enough to satisfy our needs, but not enough to satisfy our greed. So that absolutely resonates with me. And I also was thinking of, and I know this is probably not the right place, but there's this very famous couplet which I only know in Hindi, Urdu, which goes like "Lamhe khata karte hain, sadiyan saza paati hain." So it's the moment, the mistakes that you make in that moment that you pay for in lifetimes to come. So I completely agree. Let me take up the one question which I find has a very, very holistic application. And I think Miss Riddhi Kapoor has written to us, and it's a fairly long question, so I'm just going to paraphrase it. And she's basically saying that in her society, there was a lot of water leakage that was happening, and she had to basically convince the RWA, I'm assuming the Residents Welfare Association, to look at the other negative impacts of the water leakage in order to convince them to stop the water leakage. So it's a very, very interesting question, because you're not looking at your natural resource as natural capital in itself, and you're looking at that natural resource as an exploitative resource of other resources. So it's an open for all question. I know it also requires resource mobilization, maybe creating awareness, environmental education in a sense where you can embed the requirement to appreciate natural resources for their ecosystem services and so on and so forth. And I know that I'm throwing around environmental policy words, but I know that this is something that we've all seen, and how the coin of sustainability is often the coin that you accumulate through other services that it provides. So anyone who wants to take up this question of value proposition, can it ever be sustainable? Can it be sustainable? Can it be profit worthy for its own worth?
So I can quickly answer that. I mean, from my experience, so value proposition need not always be in money terms, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So it can have various aspects. It can have emotional aspects, right? It can have economic aspects as well, right? It can have other practical aspects as well. So let me give an example from my experience in selling solar home systems. So the solar home systems that we sold to rural households in a lot of rural households in UP and Bihar were more expensive than some of the other status quo options that were there.
Yeah.
And we were finding it really hard to sell it to those people because they were just more costly. What we did find out through our field research was that trust matters a lot in rural India, for example, right? So if someone bought our equipment and someone else trusted that person a lot, and they just blindly bought our equipment, even though it costed more than what is available in the market. And that's where this concept of Urja Mitras came, where we targeted trustworthy people in the village to buy the equipment first, and everyone else listened to them. And even though it was costly, they started buying them, and after using it, they started realizing the benefits of that product over other stuff like, say, kerosene lamps or other things. So I think the value proposition is not just economic in nature, one has to really investigate the problem in a more comprehensive way. And so
I think that's actually a very good way to put it, because again, I refer to one of my lectures and it's becoming annoying to myself as well. But before I do that, let me go to Anirban, because I know Anirban had a couple of points there as well.
Can you just tell me the name of the person who asked the question?
It's Riddhi, Anirban.
Riddhi.
Yeah.
Awesome question,
Riddhi
really.
Kapoor. Yeah.
Awesome question, because those of us who want to enable sustainability in society, we have to be able to talk in the terms, in the language that people understand. So there are loads of people who don't understand emissions, but very few people who don't understand air pollution. So similarly, if you go and tell somebody you should turn off your tap, the fellow may not give you the light of day. But if you tell the person that, look, if you let the water keep dripping, there is a big chance that the seepage will start in the building and you will spend 20 lakhs repairing that seepage. And that the RWA will easily understand. So I'm delighted that she took that approach. You have to speak in the way that people understand to be able to make the change, as in everything else. We take natural resources for granted. We usually don't have to pay for them. But imagine if nature were to give us an invoice, what would the value be? And that, if you even, so in our organization, when it comes to water, we say, look, water doesn't have an economic price, but when there's a shortage, the first cut comes to industry. Now imagine the situation becomes so bad that we have to shut the factory for one day. What would the cost be? And are you willing to bear that cost? So is there a way you can protect yourself? And how can you use water more responsibly? So it's exactly the same way Vidhi spoke to the RWA. The key message being you have to talk to people in the language that makes sense to them if you want to drive sustainability in society. So thank you for the question.
That's a brilliant point. And Anirban, I'm just extrapolating your what you've taken from the question. And I'm just thinking that because we're talking to the youth and about the youth, maybe there's an answer in your answer there as well, that how do you engage the youth by appealing to what attracts them the most about sustainability? So maybe there are some other key features. Again, I know that all of our panelists are busy people, so we must not keep them far beyond what they have agreed to. I must conclude this segment of our certificate workshop today as we move into the lecture after this. Let me first thank each of our panelists. I still feel that we could have gone on for a little more time at least. And there are a couple of questions that I'm bubbling with, and I'm sure the audiences as well. I would request all of the audience to write to us your questions, and we'll see if we can get some of them answered by our panelists over email as well. Let me thank Mr. Ghosh, Anirban Ghosh, for joining us. I know you had to take out some time, but it has been truly inspiring to hear from you. Ms. Raghav, Gayatri, thank you so much for always being so supportive with every youth activity that we come up with and that is happening around. I know that you are one of the torch bearers of these youth engagement movements around the globe, and we're very lucky to have you share your thoughts on this platform. And Vidyut, finally, thank you for being the torchbearer of inspiration when it comes to youth and choosing sustainability as a vocation, making a difference both at the ground level and otherwise. So it really is laudable the way you have merged social impact and sustainability. Thank you to our panelists, and we hope to continue this conversation. And hopefully, I'll request time and settle for another podcast or a webinar where we can finish the conversation properly. But for now, I know that all of you have things to do. So thank you. And thank you to all the audience members. Please do stay on because we're starting with our lecture. Please do stay safe. We are in troubling times. Wear a mask, avoid going out, avoid passing it on to other people, and always be kind. Remember that there are other people who are suffering. So please have that thought in your head when you're conversing with others. Thank you so much, our panelists, and thank you for taking out the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So guys, now we have our lecture, the first lecture of the certificate workshop, which was following the panel discussion, which was, and I apologize again, I feel greedy myself for having to end it so soon, but we have a whole lecture lined up for you now, and then one after this. And let me also announce that it is only when you attend all of these three segments. So the panel discussion we just got done with, the lecture that my co-director of the GPOTS Fellowship is going to deliver, and the lecture that will happen after this, which will be on economics of environment that we spoke of recently. That is when you will be awarded your certificate. So our team will be checking if everyone is present in all the three segments. I must also address a couple of questions that have come in asking, how do you take this up as a vocation if you're not directly involved in it? So the answer to that is, and I invite you to check out the GPOTS Fellowship, the Global Policy, Diplomacy, Sustainability Fellowship. It is a platform, and Arpit can talk about this a little as well, because Arpit is the co-director of the GPOTS Fellowship, but this is a platform which enables you, gives you the tools to take up public policy, sustainability, and international relations in a holistic way, and gives you all the tools to become successful professionals when you're dealing with these things. Over to you, Arpit.
All right, thank you so much, Ishan. And I must admit that I had been struggling to get into the rooms since the past 15 minutes. So again, a great congratulations to all of you who have been able to make it in. Really excited about, I was watching the earlier discussion live, and I was just thinking that, this is the kind of spirit that we need. This is the kind of narrative that we need. if we want to make any real difference on the ground, because it again starts from, what Edmund Burke talked about, that whenever you want to create a society around something, you have to create a concept of like-minded individuals. And as long as you don't have any common mental models or shared values, you won't be able to do that. And I'm glad that we are able to talk about some of those shared values, shared mental models over here. And that's good priming for what we are going to do right now, because right now we're going to be talking about not just mental models, not just shared values, but then pure incentives. That how do we use pure incentives to get people, get the society as a collective to take action for positive environmental change. And this is the kind of stuff really what we do at the GPOTS Fellowship. So we talk about public policy, diplomacy, and sustainability. And we see what can we really do in terms of creating shared values, as well as well-designed interventions based on people's real incentives to be able to bring about real change on the ground. So I invite you to apply for this fellowship, because what you're seeing right now, this is our day-to-day. This is what, these are the level and intensity of discussions that we engage in on a day-to-day during this fellowship. So I invite you to check that out. And with that, we jump into what we are scheduled to talk about today. And that's about game theory and public policy focused on the SDG 13, focused on climate change. This is going to be an interactive sort of session. Please feel free to write your questions, etc., in the chat box. If you want to raise your hand, you can raise your hand, and then I can just jump in and talk a little bit about what are the more fundamental implications of the concepts that we're discussing. So what we are talking about over here is how do you use people's real incentives to bring about change. It's almost like, on a day-to-day basis, what we see is we are going about our lives. We know a lot about sustainability. We know a lot about environment, but then we don't see so much action in the ground. We not only see it for the environment, we see it for, just other basic habits such as littering. So, there are countries where, you see people littering without much guilt. And then there are countries wherein you see people just using the waste bins, separating the waste, etc., and not literally making the streets dirty. Now, if you ask people in the countries where they are littering, a lot of times they would be very well aware that littering is a bad thing to do. Then why do they still litter? Okay, those are some of the complex questions that really bother me on a day-to-day basis. Or there are a number of times, and I'm sure that many of the young folks over here would agree, that it is absolutely frustrating to see so many laws which are so progressive in a country like India, and so many judgments coming out of the National Green Tribunal and all of these bodies which are so progressive, not allowing industries to throw their waste untreated into the rivers and water bodies, etc. But then all of these beautiful looking laws, they remain ink on paper, because when you actually go on the ground, it becomes really difficult to get some of these laws implemented. And you see a lot of it being talked about in theory, but then on ground people are still stuck in the kind of equilibrium almost as they were earlier. So the law doesn't really change people's game of life or behavior on the ground. So that's why we want to understand, okay, what is people's game of life? What are the behaviors that we would like to see, and how do we bring about some of those behaviors in real life? So that's why we need the study of game theory here. I would really appreciate if some of the audience members could turn on their videos. It's just easier for me to teach a lecture if I can see a few faces. If some of us are comfortable, I would request that you do that. But without further ado, you need to know 3 things about game theory when you're talking about it. So thank you, Rachita, Shrishti. I see a couple of you turning on the videos, Nayonika. Now, the first assumption when you're talking about game theory is the assumption of rationality, which means that, you know, I want to maximize my payoffs. I want to maximize the benefits that I receive out of any transaction. I want to increase my own welfare and utility and reduce all of the costs and disutilities of, any behavior that I might commit. So, if I'm going out, if I'm doing a business, I want to increase my profits. If I'm talking to a stranger, I want to derive the most amount of value and pleasure from that conversation. I want to reduce my costs. I want to increase my values. Okay. So that's rationality, essentially. The second thing that you need to know is rationality should be common knowledge if game theory is to operate, which means that I should know that you are rational as a person. You should know that I am rational as a person. I should know that you know that I am rational as a person, and I should know that you know that I know that you are rational as a person, and so on and so forth. So when we have that common knowledge of rationality, then we can play games together, right? And the last bit is equilibrium, and equilibrium is a concept that you always have a set of strategies. So let's say if we are playing a game, we could either cooperate together, or we could just not cooperate and compete. Equilibrium is that set of strategies. Let's say cooperate, or compete. These are bundles of strategies. So that bundle of strategy from which nobody would want to unilaterally deviate. So if we are at cooperate, then it is in nobody's real favor. You would not, if you're a rational person, then you would not want to move from cooperate to compete, because for competing, your payoffs or the benefit that you derive by competing is going to be lower. So any set of strategies, a lot of times you'll see that compete is an equilibrium strategy. Or when we are talking about littering, then in certain countries littering is the equilibrium, because even if you're not littering, then the others are littering and the streets are still so dirty. So you are paying the costs by not littering, you are being inconvenienced, but the overall status quo is still maintained. So that does not form an equilibrium. So just technically speaking, that's the definition of equilibrium, a set of strategies from which nobody would want to unilaterally deviate. Now, just a heads up over here. When we talk about rationality and common knowledge of rationality, we are past that stage in social sciences where we consider human beings to be a purely rational entity. So I get this question a lot, and I have to admit, going right into it, that we operate under bounded rationality. That's what behavioral economics has taught us. But that doesn't really change much around for us. It just changes, game theory would still work out even if you're talking about bounded rationality. We're not getting into the details of how, but then just for modeling, an assumption of rationality is good enough. So now coming to the real meat. There are certain laws which are very easy to implement. For example, what side of the road that you want to drive on. So typically what you see that in countries, there are certain countries which say that, okay, we are all going to decide to drive on the left side of the road, and the whole country starts driving on the left side of the road. There are certain other countries which decide that, okay, we are going to drive on the right side of the road, and everybody decides that. You don't typically need a lot of policing. You don't typically need a lot of enforcement to ensure that people are driving on the same side of the road, right? And why is that the case? Because it's in people's benefit to stick to one side. There's no better side. Left is not better than right. But it just makes an intuitive sense to people. There's, this is a concept that Kaushik Basu, who was my professor of game theory, calls focal point. It creates a focal point where the government doesn't need to enforce. The government just needs to play a role of the signaler, where the government just signals that, okay, this is the equilibrium that we are going to stick to. Everyone drives on the left. Okay. Now, if you look at it, if you are a person where everyone is driving on the left and you're driving on the right, then, if the society is driving on the left and you're driving on the right, it is not in your benefit, because sooner than later, you're going to have a crash, right? Similarly, if you're in, let's say, the US and everyone is driving on the right, there's no incentive for you to drive on the left unilaterally, because you're going to crash. So these are the two equilibria that exist already. And it's easy for us as human beings to just stick to the equilibria and come close to the equilibria. That's the focal point. If I have to formally show this, then this is going to be the payoff matrix that I will see. So I have, these in typical games, you have players. So there is one player. You could have multiple players and multiple payoffs, etc., multiple strategies. But then, just for the sake of simplicity, two players over here. There's me, and I play rows. So I play two strategies, either left or right. But then I play rows, and my payoffs are here in blue before the comma. And then there's another player. You could call it one entity. You could call it as the whole society, and they play columns. Okay, so they play like this and like this. Okay, this could be left, right, up, down, whatever. But right now, since we are talking about roads, it's only left, right. Okay, and sometimes in other games you could have more than two strategies. So let's say left, right, up, down. So you'll just add the number of rows. So okay, that aside, this is the game that we have. So I can either play left, and the society also plays left. Okay, and if we are over here, then I will not want to unilaterally move from left to right. I don't want to go from 5 to -5, right? Similarly, if I'm here, I don't want to go from 5 to -5. If everybody is driving on the right, I don't want to move from 5 to -5. Sorry, 5 to -1. So doesn't make sense for me to do that. Similarly, if there's just one more person in the society, if just for the sake of modeling, if we are here, they don't want to move from here to here, 5 to -1. And similarly, if we both are driving on the right, then the society doesn't want to move from 5 to -1, which means that if there is if it is in nobody's interest to unilaterally change the strategy, that means you're talking about an equilibrium. So you have two types of equilibria. None of them is better than the other. The government can just say that, okay, this is the equilibria, left is what we are sticking to, or right what we are sticking to. And the reason why this sort of a thing works, it doesn't need so much of implementation and enforcement, is because it's just easy for people to intuitively catch the equilibria. The law just brings people closer to the equilibria. So these are easy problems to solve, even though I know that some of you must be thinking that, I've been to those Indian villages where it's just hard for people to even stick to the lane. But that's another thing. Those are exceptions. Even if you go to the most rural parts of the country, you would find people sticking to one side of the lane, even with minimal enforcement. So certain these are certain laws which are easy to implement. Now the problem is that when you talk about public goods, so such as clean air, or such as a safe society, or lighting on the road, some of these good things that we national security, some of these good things that we all strive for in a society, that is where this sort of a problem emerges, where there are a number of laws, but then people would not people would free ride, people would not just come together and adhere to those laws, because it's just in the nature of public goods that private individuals or the private enterprise does not provide enough of them. So just before we get into why that challenge exists, and why laws are not super easily enforced in public goods, it's just instructive to understand what public goods really are. So public goods are typically, and I'm sure the economists over here would know this already at the back of their hand, but public goods have two features. One is non-excludability, and the other is non-rivalry. So non-excludability essentially means that you have a public good, you pay for it, you get it. You don't pay for it, you still get it. So think about it in terms of national security, right? You pay your taxes, the army is protecting you. You don't pay your taxes, it's not as if the army is going to come and say that, hey, by the way, not protecting you, you didn't pay your taxes, sorry. So that's not happening. So another aspect of public goods is non-rivalry, which means that my consumption of the public good does not diminish your consumption of the public good. So if I have a strong army in the nation, or if I have clean air in the nation, then my consumption of clean air does not really reduce your consumption of the clean air, right? So non-excludability and non-rivalry. However, you would see a lot of times that even public goods these days, they are quickly turning into private goods. And if I, just show you the broad definitions of what are the various types of goods, you'll be able to understand this by a few examples that I share over here. So number one is, as you see, public goods, national defense, street lighting, etc., etc. They are non-rival, non-excludable. They're also common pool resources, and these are also very important. So potable water, for example, is a common pool resource. Common pool resources are non-excludable, but they are rival. So think of it in terms of, even easier than potable water. What's easier to understand is fish in a pond. Okay, so let's say you have a pond in your vicinity, and there are there's a population of fish that reside that pond. Now it's not excludable, which means that I don't need to pay to go out there in the pond and just fish over there, because it's a public pond. You can just go there and you can fish and eat your fish, etc., etc. But it's rival, because if I extract more number of fishes, and if I consume that them, that reduces the amount of fish that you have for yourself, right? Now think of it in terms of potable water. So Ishan would know the exact figures, but then if I'm not wrong, then 3 to 3.5% of the total water in the world is potable, right? And what does that mean? That water has a limited regenerative capacity as well. So if I consume a lot more potable water than the rest of the population, there is fewer liters of potable water available for the others to consume. Okay, so water, just like fishes in the pond, fishes have a regenerative capacity as well. So if you overconsume them, they would not be able to regenerate, and you would exhaust the whole of the pool resource. So what we are talking about today essentially is these two things. So public goods and common resource pools, and that's the kind of problem that we are trying to solve. That how do we ensure that we have enough clean air, enough potable water, etc., etc. But there's another type of good which is called the quasi-public good. This is also called a club good. So a club good is essentially you pay for it, you get it, but then my consumption does not reduce your consumption. Okay, so see how it is different from common resource pool. Common resource pool, you don't have to pay for it. You get it whether you pay for it or not. And your consumption reduces my consumption. But in a club good, think of it as a toll road. You've paid for the toll road. You're on that road. So you pay for it, you get it, but you don't pay for it, you are outside. But once you've paid and you're in, then your consumption does not reduce my consumption. So if I'm on the toll road, if you're on the toll road, we can both speed up. And, it does not really inconvenience any of us. Or think of it in terms of, cable TV, or think of it in terms of, a projector that I put in the room and I created into a movie hall. Somebody has to pay for it to enter it. But then once we start watching the movie, then my consumption of the movie does not really diminish their consumption of the movie, unless I'm one of those jerks who's throwing popcorns on the others and, talking loudly on my phone. Don't do that. Then it does. Then it's no longer a quasi-public good. But then once, you get the idea that once you pay in, then you can consume as much as you can without diminishing others' consumption. And finally, there are private goods. That's your Big Mac. That's your, Nike shoes. So these are excludable as well as rival, which means you pay for it, you get it. You don't pay for it, you don't get it. And your consumption diminishes my consumption. Okay. Now, if you've gotten this bit, then let me just walk you through the darker side of things. What's happening in this world right now? You look at clean air. Clean air is typically considered as a public good. Clean air is considered as something that is non-rival, non-excludable. I pay for it, I get it. I don't pay for it, I still get it if I have clean air. It's also non-rival. My consumption of clean air does not reduce your consumption of clean air. But now if you look at the reality, then what you'd find is that increasingly with the developmental imperatives of countries like India or any other developing country where you are still committed to burning a lot of coal, natural gas, etc., in the name of development, if you are living in a developing country, then you're paying a premium. You are not receiving so much of clean air as you could have had you been born in an Amsterdam or a Germany or upstate New York. So or a Norway or Sweden. So if you are to breathe clean air, you have to be in a richer country, put very simply. And if you are, and that's increasingly happening, that was not the case earlier. You could have gone to more underdeveloped countries like Mongolia, etc., and breathed clean air. But then the projections, they show that it is only going to be the richer countries which are really going to enjoy some amount of clean air, which means that clean air is slowly becoming excludable, which means that if you want to breathe clean air, then you have to live in a country where the cost of living is much higher. So in a way, you have to pay in to be able to breathe clean air. So from a non-excludable entity, you have moved clean air to be an excludable entity. So from public good, you have made it into a quasi-public good, right? So it is only countries which can afford not to burn fossil fuel, not to burn coal. It is only those countries which are obviously going to be richer and which are obviously going to be more expensive to live in, which will be able to have clean air. So you have to kind of pay in for that. It becomes a club good. And gradually, the funny thing that you'll see, and you could do a quick Google search these days now, where you can find, clean air being sold as a private good. You find Ladakh air, you find air from Sweden and from the North Pole, etc. Essentially, you find these funny cylinders with a mask on it, and you can buy them and you can breathe Ladakh air or, that sort of a clean air, and that becomes a private good completely. And if you think that's preposterous, you should not be so alarmed, because we have already done that with water, with potable water. Because I remember, when I've been to a number of friends' places in San Francisco, a number of people are just living on those crates of mineral water. They don't really have any sort of a direct water supply or any sort of a direct potable water line in their house. All that they do is that they just buy crates and crates of those mineral waters, and that's the only water that they drink. Or you have people who just drink sparkling water. So see how things like clean air and clean water are now gradually moving from being public goods or common resource pools to rival and excludable private goods. Okay, so that's the major challenge what's happening now. The problem is, why does that happen? Is public goods as well as common pool resources, they become victims of the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, and I would typically show you this video to make you understand what prisoner's dilemma is, but then I think an easier way to do it is by playing this game. Okay, so think of it this way. First, we'll play this game, and then I'll tell you how does it apply to the environment. So let's say I see Rachita over here on my screen. So let's say Rachita and we are playing this game where there are 5 apples which are kept inside a classroom. Okay, and this is the resources that exist in the world, and we have to divide these 5 apples amongst ourselves. So we are standing outside of the classroom. We have to enter in, and we have to divide these apples amongst ourselves. And either we can be very civil about it, and we can say that, okay, let's just divide 2.5 apples out here, and we are going to go in, we're going to act civil, just divide it equally, and we'll be fine. Okay, or what we can do is that go in, fight for those apples, and we have a scuffle, we have a fight, we destroy 1 apple, and we leave with 2 each. Okay, so these are the 2 things. Either we can cooperate or we can not cooperate. The cooperate strategy, we'll call it the hawk strategy. You're like a hawk. And the defect strategy or the non-cooperate strategy, we will call it the dove strategy. Okay. So we can either be hawks or we can either be doves. Now, the thing with prisoner's dilemma is that even though we know that cooperating is the better strategy, we end up by not cooperating with each other, and therefore we end up with a lot fewer, a suboptimal solution, a lot fewer apples than we would have otherwise. So what happens really is that Rachita and I, we make a promise that, okay, we are going to cooperate, we're going to play doves inside. But once we are entering, Rachita thinks that, what if I go in there and I am just moving in slowly, acting all civil in the room, and Arpit just jumps in and pounces on all of the apples and runs away with all 5 of them. I'm rational. So I don't want to be in a situation where I'm taken to be the fool and Arpit runs away with all 5 of the apples, right? So this is not a situation where I want. This is not where I want to end up. This is not where Rachita wants to end up, right? And similarly, I'm also thinking exactly this, that even though Rachita has promised that she's going to act civil, what if I just walk in very coolly and Rachita rushes to the table and captures all of the apples and runs away with it? So I don't want to be in this situation where she has all of the apples and I don't have any. So what is my best strategy? What is my best strategy? My best strategy is that I will go in and I would rush to the table, not act civil, and try to grab as much as possible. And the same would be the strategy for Rachita, even though we have decided earlier that we are not going to do this, right? Because we just have one game over here and we want to maximize. We are rational, we are maximizers. So eventually what's going to happen over here is we are going to end up with 2 apples each. We will destroy 1 apple in our fight. And that's the tragedy of the commons, that we could have ended up with a lot more. And now imagine this happening exactly in terms of public goods and common pool resources. So let's say let me take you to the banks of river Yamuna or Ganga, and let's say in Uttar Pradesh you have the river and you have a number of tanneries, these leather tanneries that throw in a lot of waste and affluents in the rivers. So let's say you have 3 tanneries by the river, okay? Or it could be any particular factory, any particular industry, and they throw in a lot of waste into the river, okay? Now I come up with a law, or NGT comes up with the circular that you cannot pollute the river without waste, without treating your waste. Okay, so let's say I am this person, I am the owner of this factory, and I say that, okay, now the government has asked me not to throw my waste into the river without treating it. So which means that I will have to invest in a water treatment plant. And if I invest in a water treatment plant, let's say, I put it over here, that's going to cost me some money. And if I was earning, if my margins were X, now my margins would probably be X by 4, right? Because I've spent some amount, I'm going to be incurring greater costs. So that's going to eat into my profits, right? Now, what if I am the only person out of these 3 who is abiding by the law? So if I'm the only person who's abiding by the law, that means that I will incur that extra expenditure. I will set up that water treatment plant or waste treatment plant. I will be less competitive in the market because now, I've invested in this thing, which increases my costs, while others are not doing it. So others are more competitive, their profitability is much better, and they are still polluting the river. So I'm not even able to make any change to the levels of pollution in the river. So I really have no incentive, if I were to do it all alone, to invest in this water treatment plant. It is only when all 3 of us, we commit And typically, there are not just 3 players, there are many factories, there are many tanneries, right? And it is only when all of them commit that, okay, we will all reduce our market competitiveness, or we will all make this expenditure together to install this waste treatment plant. It is only then when you will have a situation where the pollution of the river actually comes down, and people are incentivized to not just die of being uncompetitive. Because everyone is thinking exactly this. If I am thinking over here that, okay, why should I just put the water treatment plant and be uncompetitive in my market, the other person around me as my neighbor is also thinking exactly the same. So even the other person who's my neighbor is not going to install the water treatment plant. And similarly, the other person is, the third one is also thinking that, what if I am the only one who's going to put it? If I am the only one who's going to put it, the river is still going to be dirty, and I am going to be driven out of the market. So why should I do it? So these are the kind of challenges which become really problematic in real world. And that's why you have a number of laws which are there on paper, but then enforcement becomes really hard, because it is either you get everyone to do it, and or nobody does it. And this is called the typical free rider problem, that it's in everyone's incentive to be the free rider. And free rider is easy to explain. If you're doing group assignments, you always know that one person who's the free rider. So that's essentially what's happening over here. Now, what does this mean is that, as a society, we keep moving towards suboptimal solutions. Okay, so where we could have, just through this cooperative behavior, through this coordination and cooperation, we could have played the dove strategy. We are all playing the hawk strategy, and we are ending up with fewer and fewer resources and fewer apples. Okay. The challenge over here is that the defect strategy is the equilibrium, or what we call the Nash equilibrium. If you've seen the movie Beautiful Mind, then this is the Nash equilibrium. Why? Because, again, go back to the game that we were playing, Rachita and I, of these 5 apples. Now, let's say, hypothetically, let's say that we were willing to be in this sort of a strategy combination, cooperate. Okay. But is this an equilibrium? This is not, because Rachita would want to move from 2.5 to 5. For Rachita, the best case scenario is that I cooperate and she runs away with all of the apples, right? That's what a rational person would hope for in their best of the dreams, that the other person doesn't fight for it. I fight, I grab all of the resources and I'm the richest person. Okay. So similarly, I would not want to, stick over here. If we both are cooperating, then I would always be tempted to defect and reach here. And eventually what we're going to do, we are both going to defect and we're going to be here. Okay. But if you look into this, defect is a Nash equilibrium. Because if you are here, then it is in nobody's unilateral interest to change the strategy alone. Okay. So if you're here, Rachita doesn't want to move from 2 to 0. She doesn't want to move from defect to cooperate. I don't want to move from 2 to 0. I don't want to move from defect to cooperate. So here we are. This is, our Nash equilibrium. And that is the kind of equilibrium we get stuck in when we are talking about, common pool resources or public goods, etc. So what are the strategies? How do we come out of such suboptimal equilibria? Okay. So one way of coming out of such suboptimal equilibria is the carrot and stick strategy. So that's strategy 1, that selective incentives. That's just a fancy way of saying rewards and punishments. So essentially what you do is, let's say the ideal state is this: cooperate, and you bring a police person and you ask the police person to sit outside of the classroom wherein we are playing this game. And let's say if Rachita comes out with 5 apples outside of the classroom, then this policeman is going to stop Rachita, and this person is going to be like, I see you coming out with 5 apples, which means that you played the defect strategy. You were the hawk. So I'm going to put a penalty of 4. I'm going to take away your 4 apples, and you are going to be left with just 1. Okay. And the same would be with me, that if I am coming out with 5 apples, then the policeman identify and they put a penalty of 4 on me, and this is 5. And my payoff then becomes 1. Now suddenly I have a situation where this also becomes a Nash equilibrium for me. If these are going to be the payoffs, if we know that this is going to happen, then we would rather cooperate. This also becomes an equilibrium, because now I don't want to move. Rachita doesn't want to move from 2.5 to 1. I don't want to move from 2.5 to 1. So we can just be very happy sticking over here, right? That doesn't mean that this is not an equilibrium as well. This is still an equilibrium. You can still be stuck in the defect equilibrium, because even if these are 1, okay, so do you want to move from 2 to 0? No. Do I want to move from 2 to 0? No. So this is still an equilibrium, but then you have opened another possibility with, the right amount of nudging, with the right amount of, legal communication, and with the right amount of credible actions and threats and incentives on part of the government. You can bring a society from this equilibrium to this equilibrium right with this. Okay. There's another way to. So right now you're in a society where there are two equilibria that exist, and the government can just nudge people. At least where earlier there was no good equilibria, no good Nash equilibria, you have one good Nash equilibrium as well, and a bad one. You can go a step further and you can destroy defect as a Nash equilibrium altogether. So all you need to do is that if the policeman says that, okay, if both Arpit and Rachita, you're coming out and you both have 2 apples, which means that you've both destroyed 1, then what am I going to do? I'm going to put a penalty of -3 on you. Okay. So if I see you coming out with any less than 2.5 each, then I'm going to put a penalty on you. Okay. This could be -3. This could be any number that just makes it either equal to 1 or lesser than 1. So let's say you put a -3, I get a -1 over here, I get a -1 over here. And then you see that this is no longer a Nash equilibrium at all, because I'd rather be on 0 than on -1, and Rachita would rather be on 0 than -1. And that's why the only equilibrium that exists over here is 2.5, 2.5. Okay, so this is the carrot and stick strategy. Okay. There are other strategies as well. So why is cooperation really hard with just the carrot and stick strategy is also because if you have finite rounds, if you look at one challenge of the pure payoff strategy, if you have finite rounds of a game, you will again be able to backtrack and figure out that okay, defect can be a good equilibrium. So this was one strategy that we discussed. Now we are discussing the second strategy, and the second strategy really talks about how do you increase the number of rounds in a game that brings about some cooperation. So think of it this way, that there have been cases of countries such as France and the UK, wherein throughout the medieval period, they were fighting against each other, right? So they were, at wars with each other, etc., etc. But then comes industrialization, you enter the modern period, and you realize that these two countries, even until now and throughout the world wars, they have become the best of friends. And why have they become the best of friends? Because they have come to a realization that they are in an infinite game. Okay, so infinite games and the number of stages in a game are important to bring about cooperation. So let's look at it in this way, that if there are finite games, let's say if we have games which just has 4 stages. Okay, so if we are playing the same game, let's say Rachita and I, if we are playing the same game 4 days in a row, then me or Rachita, we both being maximizers, what we would think that, okay, 4th day, even if we are being nice and hypothetically, let's say we are meeting the first day and we are saying that, okay, we will play nice and let's just maximize our utility. But I know that on the last day, Rachita is going to defect, because on the last day, Rachita is not going to, we are not going to be dealing with each other anymore, right? And I want to maximize. And I know that Rachita wants to maximize. So I know that on the last day, for example, Rachita is going to definitely, or Rachita knows that I am going to definitely defect. Okay. So what is my best response to this? My best response is that I will also defect and we will be here. Okay. But I know that this is going to happen on the last day. So on the second last day itself, I'm going to be like, okay, last day pe, we are all definitely going to defect. So let me defect on the second last day to maximize. Okay. But Rachita also knows that I'm rational and I'd be thinking this way, that, okay, last day we are all going to defect. So second last day, let me defect. So Rachita is going to defect on the second last day as well. So we are stuck over here again. And the third last day, exactly the same logic, and first day, exactly the same logic. You're able to backtrack whenever there's a end game, whenever there is a final stage to a game. That last day this person is going to defect, so second last day I should defect, and the other person knows you're going to defect on the second last day, so they will defect the day before, and eventually you have a whole series of defect. Now the problem over here is that in real life it's really hard to create a sense of infinity. Okay, but look at an infinite game. If there's an infinite game, then there is no last stage from which we can backtrack. We can just have 2 options, that one day either we can start cooperating, and one person defects, and from the rest of it, the rest of the line is going to be 2 defect, or we can just keep cooperating and increase our payoffs until infinity. And it's quick enough to realize that that's the better option if you have a sense of infinity. Okay, but a number of times, even creating just more number of stages, a lot of times you cannot create infinity. Even creating more number of stages can bring in assurances, can bring in cooperation. So that's the reason why when you see environmental laws, or when you see even defense scenarios, you don't ask people to get rid of things or ban things or install expensive what do you say filters and treatment processes and plants in a go. You phase it out. Remember again that this river, and you had these 3. So rather than me asking all of them to unilaterally put a water treatment plant, I would tell them that, okay, first of all, you have to invest in this small thing, and you can see that the others are also investing in this small component of the plant. Okay, so that everyone is moving in that direction. Okay, then you ask them that, okay, now let's move towards a bigger sort of an investment, right? And then everyone knows that the others, they can verify if I see that the others have just stopped at stage 1, then without any further investment, without me becoming more uncompetitive, I can stop taking the next step. So I can be like, okay, I have now seen that the others have also taken the second step. I can also take the second step now the third step, and so on and so forth. And then you can phase it out into steps, and you can make cooperation happen. Okay, Now, this is exactly what happens even in border conflicts. And imagine that there's a line of control over here. There's one army on this side, one army on the other, and you want to de-escalate. So you don't de-escalate in a go. You divide it into phases, because let's say you say that you withdraw this side of the this country's army withdraws by 1 kilometer, and so does this country's army. And that gives us an assurance that if this country's army is not acting in good faith and they want to come rushing back again and reclaim the line of control, then these guys also have the time to come rush back and maintain this, reclaim the status quo. But if they don't rush back, then that means that we at least have some amount of trust over here. Then you move in, let's say, a couple of kilometers further away. And same thing over here. If they had malified intentions, they would start rushing back. Then we can also start rushing back, and we can re-establish the status quo. So sometimes just phasing it out and creating various stages in a particular game. Infinity is best, but then if not infinity, then multiple stages can bring in some cooperation. And when you're designing policies, when you're designing laws, you have to, from the first strategy, you identified that how do you create better Nash equilibria. But another strategy is that, you phase things out. You don't want to do everything in one go. Okay. And obviously this is challenging because with the kind of short timelines that we are dealing with in order to bring the emissions down and bring the temperatures down, it's really, really hard for people to phase things out very quickly. But then that needs a little bit of ingenuity, and typically we have a lot of discussion around this in my fellowship lecture. But right now, let's just say that the advice is phase things out and figure out how do you do that in time. The third strategy over here is, this is the strategy that international institutions, they take. Just give me. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah. So the third strategy is what people you'd see people taking that strategy in international institutions. And this is international institutions, as you know, they do not have much enforcement capacity over nation states, right? So it's not as if the WHO can come up with global laws, or UNEP can come up with global laws and hold countries accountable for enforcing and put penalties on them, etc., etc. So what is the best thing that international institutions they do? They bridge information asymmetry. And the best way to understand it is through this example. So let's say that there are 100 fishes in a pond, and there are these 5 households that live around this pond. Okay, and the way that this pond is structured, that the moment you go anywhere below 50 fishes, okay, so if you extract more than 50 fishes in this pond in a week, then it is going to go below its replenishment capacity. The fishes won't be able to reproduce to a rate where they can maintain a minimum amount of population, and they're all going to die, right? Then you don't have any food to eat. So you have to make sure, as this whole society, that you have at least 50 fishes in this pond, nothing lower than that. So the ideal way to do it is, each household every week goes in and draws in just 10 fishes, right? So that's how everyone gets their 50 fishes, and it doesn't go any below than 50. The threshold, regenerative threshold, is maintained, and next week you again have 100 fishes, and you keep extracting those 10, 10, 10, 10 each, so as to maintain a balance at 50. But if there is lack of coordination, you can be tempted. If you're a household over here, you can then again start becoming a free rider, and maybe one week you'd say, okay, maybe I have some guests at home, let me just extract instead of 10, 11 fishes this week. And then this guy can also think that, okay, maybe let me just extract 11, I'm feeling a little hungry. And maybe this girl says that I want to have a party, and maybe let me extract 11. And lo and behold, sooner than you realize, you have lesser than 50 fishes. the regenerative capacity gets impacted, and next week everyone is hungry, there are no fishes, everyone is dying, you have a catastrophe. Okay, so everyone can be a free rider in that sense. So what do you do, and how do you design a policy that people don't do that? So essentially what you do is that you bring this gentleman, or a number of people, or from a nearby village, or representatives, one representative each from this household, and you put a body over here who sit here to monitor things. You create a rule, so you create a rule-based order in this world, and you'll come across this terminology a lot of times when you're reading about international organizations, that you will only fish from this plank. You are not going to be extracting fishes from anywhere else. Come to this forum, come to this plank, and that's where you extract your fishes. And once you're coming out, we are going to just record simply how many fishes did each household extract. So let's say this guy got 10, the first household, the second household got 10. But let's say 1 week, the third household extracted 11. Okay. So everyone knows that, this person has extracted a lot more. So maybe that week, this person would say that, okay, just so that the whole thing doesn't go below 50, I'm going to eat 9. Okay. But next week, I am going to go to this guy and I'm going to ensure that this guy does not have their 10 fishes. They have their 9, and I will extract 11 and I will restore the balance. Okay. So in a way, this simple, transparent sharing of information has created an ecosystem of self-enforcement on each other. So these countries, when you're talking about nation states and international organizations, that's essentially what they're doing. So WHO, to a large extent, UNEP, all of these organizations, their fundamental mandate is to bridge information asymmetry and have all sorts of knowledge and information transparently available for all of the countries to see, so that they can self-monitor each other eventually. They can signal that, okay, this is the country that has extracted more this time. So the countries can self-adjust. And that's the extent to which that they can bring about cooperation. Okay. There's a Frankenstein story over here as well, that what if this guy over here, or this body who's sitting on the plank, this becomes corrupt. They don't share these numbers properly. If they are not true in sharing these numbers, who is extracting how much, then again, you can go below the replenishment threshold. Right. So it's really, really important for this body to be competent, because a lot of times, not because of corruption, because of incompetence, you can report the wrong numbers here, but you also have to be very honest. And that legitimacy is what keeps some of these international organizations going. And that's why the most important aspect, asset is the legitimacy that they hold, and the competence that they bring to the table, and the trust that people have in them. As long as you have those, you have the international organizations functioning. So these are, the 3 strategies. We'll talk about a 4th strategy, and that would probably be the last strategy that we discussed today. The 4th strategy is make cooperation really, really lucrative. So what are the 3 strategies we've learned until now? Number 1 is carrots and sticks. Number 2 is stages in a game. Okay, so make it a multi-stage game. Number 3 is information symmetry, bridge information asymmetry. Number 4 is make cooperation really, really lucrative. And over here again, we're going to play a game, a quick one. And I see Shrishti on my screen now, so I will invite Shrishti to play the role of Donald while I play the role of Ronald over here. And we are going to play this real quick game. So what's happening over here is that, Ronald and Donald, they are 2 people in a society. They earn some money that they owe as income tax. Okay, and that income tax is then invested in, towards maintaining a public good, or towards creating a common pool resource. Let's say that's being invested in clean air technologies. Okay, so you do that whenever you see energy written on my screen, read it as dollars or read it as rupees. Okay, so 1 unit of energy means they have $1 that they need to invest. So this is what they're earning, $1 each, and they pool in that $1. So they create a pool of $2. And since they are investing in a public good which has a lot of positive externalities, and when you invest in a public good, if you're breathing clean air, that also means that your health is going to be good, your learning outcomes are going to be better, etc., etc. So it has a lot more benefits than the investment that goes into it, right? So let's say the benefit factor is the return on investment is 1.5 in a way. So you created a pool of $2, you got a return on investment of 1.5, and you eventually have a pool of $3 with you, right? Now, with this $3, eventually, since this is a public good, it's going to go to everybody. It's non-excludable, right? So you pay for it, you'll get it. You don't pay for it, you'll still get it. So let's say you split it equally amongst these two players in the population. So both of them get 1.5 each. So look at how beautiful it is. You invest $1 and you get 1.5 eventually. So this is a great scenario if we both are cooperating and if we both are doing our bit. Now, let's say there's another scenario where I, as Ronald, I cooperate, but Shrishti as Donald decides that they will not invest that dollar and they'll just keep it to themselves. So what's happening is that my pool that I'm creating, it's reducing to just 1.5 units of energy. Okay, so I invested $1. It's still an investment towards a public good. So there's a good return to this. So there's $1.5 that I have. And that $1.5 splits into 0.75, 0.75 and comes back to both of us in the society. But what has happened over here? If you look at it, then Ronald invested $1 and received 0.75. Okay. Donald kept on to, held on to his $1 and then got the, 0.5. So Donald is ending up with 1.75, while Ronald, who was the nice guy and who invested, is ending up with 0.75, right? So that is scenario number 2. Scenario number 3 could be just the opposite, that maybe Ronald, acts as the free rider over here, and Ronald says that I am not going to invest. Donald invests, and that 1.5 again gets split into 2 parts, and both of them, Ronald has their own $1 from earlier, and they get 0.75, and Donald has invested that $1. So, from that 1.5, they get 0.75. So now Donald is ending up with 0.75 and Ronald is ending up with 1.75. Okay, so this is where, Ronald defects and Donald cooperates. That could be one scenario. Or there could be another scenario where both of them defect. Both are like, nah, we're not going to invest in this. Let's just hold on to our $1 and let's just not do anything about it. Okay. So now if you look at it, it's your classic prisoner's dilemma situation where, defect is your Nash equilibrium. Ronald doesn't want to go from 1 to 0.5. Donald doesn't want to go from 1 to 0.75. So, and this is not an equilibrium, because for cooperate, Ronald would want to unilaterally defect, and similarly, Donald would want to unilaterally defect. So this is your equilibrium. Now, what do you do? One way of making the situation better is to increase that factor of 1.5 that we were talking about to 2.5. Okay, how do you make cooperation a lot more lucrative? And see, if I just change this factor, how everything changes. So same game, everything is the same. 1 unit of energy, both of them invest, that 1 unit of energy each. you get a return of 2.5. So you end up with $5. Okay. So earlier when you were ending up with $3, you end up with $5 now. $5 gets split up 2.5, 2.5 to both. And if they both are cooperating, then eventually by investing $1, both of them are ending up with $2.5 each. Okay, so that's the cooperate scenario. But there is also again a scenario where Donald defects. So if Donald defects, Donald has their $1. Ronald invests their $1. It turns into $2.5, and 2.5 splits equally between Ronald and Donald again. So eventually what's happening over here is that Ronald is ending up with $1.25. They invested $1. They end up with 1.25. Donald did not invest, held on to their $1, but still gets the benefit. So gets 1.25 more and ends up with 2.25. And the opposite of that can also happen, where Ronald says that, I'm not going to invest, and Donald invests, and Ronald ends up with 2.25. Donald ends up with 1.25. So you have this sort of a thing. And the final is that both are again saying, not worth it. We are not investing anything. So they are still stuck at 1-1. Okay. So this is how this new game looks like. But if you look at this new game, strangely, you'll find that defect is no longer the Nash equilibrium. Okay. So look at Ronald. Ronald would want to move from defect to cooperate over here, even if Donald is defecting. Right? You want to move from 1.1 to 1.25. Similarly, Donald would want to cooperate. Okay. Even if Ronald is defecting, because for Donald, 1.25 is better than 1. And what you see is, fascinatingly, this is a Nash equilibrium. And how? Look at this. Absolutely crazy. Do you want to move from, if you're Ronald, do you want to move from 2.5 to 2.25? No. If you're Donald, do you want to move from 2.5 to 2.25? No. What's happened over here? This is the previous game with the 1.5 return to investment, the factor. And this is the new game with a 2.5 return to investment. The structure of the game is the same. It's just that the return has changed. So you've made cooperation so lucrative where, even unilateral cooperation is, even a scenario where you are the only one who's cooperating is better than you defecting. Okay. So when you are able to create such a scenario where, mutual cooperation becomes just a lot more lucrative than unilateral defection, or even unilateral cooperation becomes a lot more lucrative than unilateral defection, then you are able to bring about greater cooperation into the game. So summing it up, 4 strategies, right? One is the carrot and stick strategy. The second strategy is how do you increase the number of phases in which what you're doing, so phase it out strategy. The third strategy is bridge information asymmetries, make information transparently available, and have those credible institutions who can do that. And the fourth is make cooperation really, really lucrative. So as long as you are able to have these 4 fundamental parameters in mind when you're designing policies, and these could be policies for within your companies, for your NGO, or if you're part of a local, national, international government, you will be fine. You will be probably designing a policy which would be implemented on the ground and which would not need a monitor all the time. Some of the first strategy would definitely need a monitor, but then typically these would be the policies that would work. So I'm not getting into the really hard problems over here. That's the stuff that I save for you to join the fellowship and learn about. But these 4 strategies, I'm sure these are good food for thought to begin with. And if we have some questions, maybe I can take a couple, or if you have some comments, if you think this was something cool that you learned today, I'm more than happy to hear your remarks. And after that, we move on to our next lecture.
So we have restricted our participants to adhere to the chat box for now.
Perfect.
Because so you're free to write in your comments, comments and observations in the chat box. Yeah. And also we have shared our details of the GPODS fellowship, so you could write to us and continue the conversation over email as well if you like. So thank you, Arpit. Thank you for the wonderful session. If there are any particular questions that you'd like to answer, you could probably do that, or we could probably start with the next lecture as well.
Sure. Let me just answer one of the questions that we have over here from Nayonika. And Nayonika is asking, are there real-life examples in development finance and responsible investing where mutual cooperation has been more lucrative? And yes, the answer absolutely is solar cells, right? Because the moment you make it more cheaper, then people start switching over to that as the more lucrative investment option. So, instead of, you're making that thing a lot cheaper, but at the same time on the market, you're making it a lot more lucrative when you're selling. Let's say a lot of times governments come up with policies where you can buy back, the government can buy back some electricity, let's say the solar energy, etc., that you produce in your house. So you invest, you procure solar energy at a much lower cost than the typical electricity that you get from the government, but you sell it back to the government at a much higher cost, at the regular cost. So the return to investment that increases. And when the return to investment increases, you see, in a number of places, I know that, certain counties in the United States and, in Germany, you have this sort of a, there's a particular term for it. I'm sure Ishan would know that it's the back metering, or you need a particular type of grid to be able to do that.
Net metering, yes. Back metering.
So once you do that, then you can, simply make solar a lot more lucrative. So once that happens, then, you're on the right side of the panel over here, where more and more people want to, buy solar, use solar, and resell that energy to the government as if it was regular electricity. So
Thank you so much, Arpit.
I will just write my email ID so that if somebody wants to get in touch, I'll take it over from there.
So guys, just to give you a brief idea, we discuss all of these questions, concepts, and a lot more. And obviously all of those questions keep coming in. You're a part of the GPODS fellowship. So I invite all of you to check it out. The website is already in the chat box. And Arpit has put it again. Arpit, if you could stop sharing the screen, we will go to the other part of the, now we will be starting with the other half, or the other pillar of the GPODS fellowship. And we have a lecture designed for you to help you with some of the questions that come up with sustainability. They kind of flow from what Arpit started out as. And in the meanwhile, can we have the short video played, Aditi, and just that will also allow you guys some time to breathe. And right after that, we will be moving into the lecture. So this is for your viewing. And as soon as this is done, we would be starting with the next lecture.
This is a place where, you are not really a student. We are not really teachers. We are all coming together in a community of fellowship. And that's the reason why we call it a fellowship, where we think that everybody makes knowledge or builds knowledge based on the ideas that they already have in their mind.
The problem is greenhouse gas emissions that affect the temperature of the climate.
The agricultural land, the places which we use to grow crops, have a fair amount of saltwater intrusion.
Actually, the very close cooperation between the United States and China to come to an agreement to how to operationalize this principle into the future.
Policy making body on environment at the same level with the General Assembly for all other issues globally. But for environment, it established the United Nations Environment Assembly.
ION term, IOI, or impact on investment. So that's essentially what this, your management really should all be about. You're trying to maximize the impact on investment.
So you might define it as coordinated and synchronized action that often deliberately targets democratic states and institutions.
Someone has said, never let a crisis go to waste. So we are in a huge crisis. Let's not waste it, and instead build from it, build safer, better, and in a more holistic fashion.
I am thoroughly enjoying the fellowship. I think it's keeping me enthusiastic, lively. I'm really excited. I look forward to lectures. I look forward talking to Arpit and Ishan more often. So I'm really glad that I am a part of GPods. I took the right decision.
GPods has helped us build such a rich network of professionals who are truly global and, are actually working at the cutting edge of solving some real policy problems.
So this is one go-to course that you really need in your life so that you can really enhance in your academic skills and get to push to what you really want to achieve in life when it comes to policy making, sustainability, and diplomacy.
Knowledge sharing that's happening, and it's not just learning from the mentors and the people who are taking the lectures, but it's also learning from the fellows and learning from your peers. And I think that's really amazing. And the fact that all the fellows come, like we all come from such diverse professional backgrounds, so that's really a huge plus.
So yeah, I think the amount of interactions I have had with my co-fellows and the mentors, so those have been very good. And since we have been in a lockdown since the past 1 year, so I haven't really had the chance to interact with new people and get new perspective into my life. So I think that way the fellowship has helped me a lot. I have so many friends across the globe now, and so the key learnings have been very helpful for me.
Take away from this fellowship, which is to always be a learner and to never stop being a student.
All right. Thank you, guys. I hope that was a bit of a breather for all of you. As we move on to our next session, and I assure you that I will try and keep it short, what I do have for you is another burning issue that we deal with at the GPods Fellowship. Now, before I start with the GPods Fellowship, please do know that we do post about the fellowship in the chat box, so you could check it out. Arpit has also posted his email ID, so you could write to him and inquire more about the fellowship. All right, so what is the next session about, and what's the big deal about it? I'm here to discuss a couple of things that you probably have heard of, and if you haven't, that's absolutely fine. But let me tell you, a lot of those international negotiations that Arpit spoke of are cruxed on, especially in environmental diplomacy, on the beneficiary-based principle. So we are going to be covering it. And as we cover it, let me also give you a couple of indications of how I would want the session to be. The first is the more we interact, the better it is, the more we learn. So please feel free to type your comments, questions as we go along. Please do try to put your videos on. I deliver lectures quite often and I get bored by looking at myself. So if you have your videos on, that's always better. There's also the safe space pledge. So please don't be hurtful in your comments towards other. This is a public platform and we're going live on Facebook as well. So we'd want to be not hurtful towards others. As long as you have an opinion and you're being respectful about it, that's absolutely fine. And I invite you to share it. The other thing, a couple of disclaimers, is what we do with the GPOD's Global Policy Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship as well. And this is a query that we get very often. What if I am not a sustainability professional? What if I'm not a public policy professional? What if I'm not an international relations professional? How do I cope with a heavy duty subject like each of these? And the answer is that for each of our courses and our mentorship sessions, we start with the very basics, right? So we start with ground zero, and that's the indication that I want to give to you through the lecture today and take you on a journey where by the end of the journey, you'll be understanding the economics of some of these things. Finally, it's a big topic that I'm trying to cover, so I would not be able to deliver all of it. For that, you'll have to join the fellowship. I'll give you bits and pieces of the case study that we could take as an example. So let's start at the very beginning. I am an astrophysics nerd. That's a bit of a disclaimer as well. So you'll see these astrophysics references every now and then in my lectures otherwise as well, especially in this one. And why are we discussing what we are going to discuss first? The reason is, and I really like this quote, if you want to understand something that is, a little more complicated than other things, you first have to unwind, uncomplicate, and go to the very basics. And that's what Carl Sagan had said. If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. So before we get onto the economics of the beneficiary-based principle, or what the beneficiary-based principle is, or what economics of environment is, we must first understand what really is environment. So as part of my research, one of the things that I do, which I find very interesting, is I go around checking what are the definitions of the term environment globally. What is the definition in India, in some other country? And one of my preliminary research showed that these are the most common elements that come in the definition of environment. All right, I'm not going to use a pen, guys. I'm not very good with it. I'll just use a laser pointer. So you have human beings as which define the environment. They're the most used term in the definition of the term environment. You have water, land, air, living creatures, plants, microorganism, property, and their interrelationship amongst each other. This is also the legal definition of environment in India. Now, do you see a commonality here? Do you see a single thread flowing through all of these elements of the term environment? I gave you a disclaimer. We're going to start at the very basics. I'm not going to assume that you're an environmental professional. That's why we're starting with the very bare minimum of the definition of environment. So a couple of things one might notice is that all of these things that are here are required for human sustenance. All right, so they're not about something that is absolutely unrelated to human beings. It is water is required, air is required, land is required, living creatures are required for food cycle and such, plants, microorganism, we know the positive role that bacteria can play in our lives, in science and those sort of things. So all of these things play a role towards humanity. What's missing then? Now, what is missing is better shown through an example. So this was a news report in one of the UK newspapers a couple of years back. This is the asteroid that is in discussion. It's called the Psyche 16. It has precious metals worth 8,000 quadrillion pounds. It includes, gold, platinum, iron, nickel. It's all on your screen. And it is being planned that it will be visited, and perhaps at some point of time down the line, it will be mined. Now, if I ask you that if tomorrow I go and mine this asteroid, Psyche 16, would I be constrained by any law? would I be constrained by any notification, by any regulation, global or national? The answer would be no, right? Because those laws would apply if you're covered within the definition of environment. So when I asked you, what are we missing? We're missing a huge chunk, which is beyond our perception, or which was beyond our perception when we drafted these definitions. So first of all, what we do at the GPOTS Fellowship is we challenge ourselves to ask the right question. Is this definition of environment right? Is this globally accepted definition of how you perceive water, or how you perceive air, or how you perceive ecosystem, is that correct? So if it does not include something that would be done in some time, probably it's lacking. But if you still think that, it isn't just because human beings made the definition and everything is about them, I'll give you another scenario. And if any of you are into science or have a science background, please do send in your answers, because I'm very keen to know what people think about this. But if you were to guess what are the 4 or 5 most common elements in the universe, and I've put a periodic table for your viewing. And for those of you who were not science students, I apologize. Maybe you're having PTSD by looking at the periodic table, but and that includes me, by the way. What were the 5 most common elements? What are the 5 most common elements in the universe? I'm going to look into the chat if there are any. All right, Aman has got it absolutely right. So it is hydrogen, helium, carbon. I'll tell you, it's hard to keep track of all the chat answers. It's hydrogen, helium, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Not in that specific order, but hydrogen and helium are the most common. And what are the most common elements that human beings are made up of? Any guesses? Helium is an inert gas, so let's leave that aside. What are the most common elements found in human beings? So we have a lot of carbons, and Aarti has written that twice, so into 2. Okay, so I'll tell you what it is. The 4 most common elements found in our bodies, that our bodies are made up of, are exactly the same: hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. The point I'm trying to make here is that human beings have defined environment, but human beings are actually a minuscule part of environment, and something that we haven't really understood, something that we're still wrapping our brains around, something that we hope to define, we've tried to define, but we have not succeeded the way we should have. That's what I suggest. That's what I argue. That's what I invite all of you to challenge as well. So there's something wrong with us trying to define something of which we are a minuscule part, or as one of the astrophysicists has said, we're just stardust floating around in space. But if you still think that no, human beings have defined it rightly and they should be the ones commanding the definition of environment, let's take you through another question. If this football field, and I know that we have some people joining in from the US, so if this soccer field was the timeline of our planet, Earth, in this way, how long have human beings been here? Is it the penalty box here? Is it the midline? Is it the penalty box here? Is it the goal post? Is it where defenders play, center forwards play, whatever? Where do you think human beings came in that timeline of our planet? Okay, so we have one answer, the goal post, and that's actually true because human beings have only been here equivalent to the width of a blade of grass, which is 1/16 of an inch. So if you're talking about the football field of our planet in terms of timeline, human beings have been here for a minuscule time. Why am I telling you all of this? I'm telling you all of this to tell you that our definitions have been about our senses, about our perspectives, with everything. And that's all right when you're talking about certain policies, but when you're talking about environmental policies, you'll realize that our definitions have been found to be inapt, almost arrogant in some points, where you have tried to put a framework to a certain thing that you haven't completely understood or you have undermined at some point. And that leads to me to one of the ethics approaches that I cover during the GPODS fellowship. Obviously, we cover a lot more during the fellowship, but anthropocentrism is something that I wanted to touch about today. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of anthropocentrism. You've probably heard of how humans are at the center of it all according to this approach, how everything else but human beings is there for our exploitation, including natural resources and everything else. Now, if that is the case, if anthropocentrism has been such a prominent ethical philosophy to drive environmentalism, then why haven't we given it up? And if you think we have given it up, when did you think we gave it up? If you think that we gave it up when that technological and policy intervention took place in the US in the 60s, you must ask yourself, why did that policy revolution happen in terms of environment? Now, another question that I threw during the fellowship is, if anyone is able to guess the place and the decade in these photos. They're all from the same decade, they're all from the same place. If anyone's able to guess. Okay. It is the 60s, so both Aman and Noyonika are right. Which place are we talking about? It is in London, by the way. No, it's not New York either. It is the US. All right, so we have paucity of time and you guys have been patiently listening in for some time. So I'll just quickly move ahead. It's not Industrial Revolution. That was a couple of centuries prior. This is 1960s LA. A big hint was the Pan Am Airlines here. So 1960s has been seen as this, threshold point, this tipping point where environmental policies came to the fore, and there was in the US now the states could have their own environmental standards that could be above and beyond the federal standards. Technological intervention started happening, inventions started happening. So there were catalytic converters and exhaust pipes that were now more conducive to controlling air pollution. But all of that happened. All of that celebratory congratulations that were given out when all of these things happened was because there was a tipping point. And what was that tipping point? The tipping point was humans, like we do in Delhi these days in winters, or in Beijing or elsewhere on this planet. We realized that our children, due to this pollution that is surrounding us, are being born with lung diseases, skin diseases, all of those things, emphysema, eczema, asthma, all of those things. We realized that because of the smog, we can no longer see beyond 3 meters. We realized that we have to wear these masks that you can see on the screen if we have to be able to breathe freely in the atmosphere that is surrounding us. So those policy and technological interventions of the 60s and 70s, the Clean Air Act came then in the US. All of those things happened because somewhere at the anthropocentric level, humans decided that no, this is not working out for me. So even the biggest policy revolution in sustainability was cruxed on anthropocentrism, how humans are at the center of it all. Now, the question is that these people that you see, or these people who are driving the car that you see on your screen, that suffered at the hands of the LA smog, and you can take the London smog as an example for earlier, since some of you have written that. Were they the people who started this smog? Were they the people who had a causal nexus with the environmental pollution that was happening at this scale? One. Secondly, were they the people who paid the price? Now, if you have these two answers different from one another, then there's something wrong. Because why should one generation pay the price of the harms caused by another generation? And if it does, should that be called the beneficiary-based principle? And that's basically beneficiary-based principle in a nutshell, that you have enjoyed the plunder that has been caused of environment by your previous generations. And now you have a higher standard of living, higher living happiness index, or whatever it is called. And that is why you're benefiting from it. And that is why you should pay for it. So let's go back to that question. If it wasn't the generation living through 60s, 70s that was to be paying for Delhi smog, should they have paid for it? Because they did pay for it. I said that you could not see beyond 3 meters. Your children were being born with eczema and emphysema and all of these terrible diseases. Now that's where beneficiary pays principle comes in. And if you think that it's just a philosophy, it's just a principle that people talk about, that's not the case. Principle 7 of the Rio Declaration of the Earth Summit of UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, talked about common but differentiated responsibility. So how the global north had plundered the environment, so there was culpability, and they had the capacity, the financial resources because of that plunder, because of which now they should pay the global south for the damage that they caused over the years since Industrial Revolution. That's beneficiary pays principle in a nutshell. Now you might argue, and if it is hard for you to imagine how does this play out in real life, imagine that you have a friend who stays in London or New York or LA or wherever. And tomorrow you go to him, the governments go to him and they say that, listen, under the beneficiary pays principle, you have to pay your friend in India X amount of money. Does that really make sense? Because it wasn't your friend's fault that he has a higher standard of living because of the environmental pollution that was caused by his ancestors, actions of whom he had no control over, right? So it might feel a little off, but there are two views to this. There are the views of the conservative views of Edmund Burke, Eric Newmer, Axel Gosseries, I apologize for the typo. And there are axiological views, individualistic views, which say that, listen, let's keep the pollution controlled by the act of the polluter. Let's not blame someone else who was not there. There is also a population ethics principle that comes in. But that's just me setting the background. These are things that we go into much more detail during the fellowship. I'm talking about what if that person has to pay? What if that friend has to pay? And in most of the circles, the question is not just about morality. You can go through Friedrich Nietzsche's work and appreciate rationality and morality. But I'm not on that. Let's divorce ourselves from the question of rationality and morality. Let's talk about what is the real issue. Why would you not give someone the money that you earned, not by your hard work or not by your ethical approaches, but because one of your forefathers plundered the environment? Why would you not give that money? Why would you not make that transaction? The answer is, whenever you take morality and rationality out of all of the discussions of environmental conservation, the one thing you're left with is money, the economics of it. How does it work out in real life? And that's what we're here to discuss. And I'm going to take a case study and explain it. But before I do, if money is the issue, what if I have a very, very detailed framework on air control, right? What if I have an Air Act? What if I have a Water Act? What if I have an Environment Protection Act? What if I have rules on plastic, e-waste, biomedical waste, hazardous waste, MSW, all of those things? If I give all of my resources to environmental conservation, shouldn't we be able to achieve it? Now the answer is in front of you. Because if you take India as an example, we have the Clean Air Act, we have the Air Act, we have the Water Act, we have the EP Act, we have the rules, we have the plastic waste rules, biomedical rules, MSW rules, e-waste rules, plastic rules, all of those rules. We have one whole framework of legislative mechanisms, how we can control environmental pollution. But why is this not working out? One of the answers, and one of the many answers and many segments of answers, many segments to the answer to that question is that environment is not just controlled by environmental laws. Now, let's go back to the definition of environment that I put to you at the start of this discussion. It is you, me, water, land, microorganism, plants, living creatures, property, interrelationship, everything. So by that, the corollary to that would be that everything affects the environment as well. So policies that are not intended for environment, policies that seem disconnected from the environment, have an environmental impact. And how do you value that environmental impact is the question that we're dealing with. Now, let me also give you a disclaimer. We're not going to be giving an answer to that question because that's an answer that you'll have to find for yourself in the fellowship. But I'm going to put a question to you and hopefully create enough curiosity for you to look for the answer. So we come to something completely disconnected, as I promised, because we're talking about how disconnected policies actually play into environmental impacts. And we talk about one of the most sought after things, or sought after real estates across the globe. These are some of the most prominent class skyscrapers, right? If you've been to London, you've probably seen the walkie-talkie and the Bullet building. These are very famous. Now, we'll talk about, because I said I would not be able to cover the length and breadth of this, so I'm going to take case studies here. I'm going to take the case study of this one building here. This is called the walkie-talkie. It was at one point of time the most expensive real estate in the UK. And it is supposed to be aesthetically very pleasing. People like glass scrapers, people like to look at them. The Manhattan skyline is very famous for this. Now, if that is the case, would you have expected something like this? So this walkie-talkie building that I just showed you here in this slide on your left, there was a car parked in front of it, and that car melted partially because of the sunlight that was reflected from this building. And I find this quote to be very funny. It's absolutely ruined Martin Litzid told the BBC referring to as a Jaguar exchange. But the point that I'm trying to make is, remember how glass houses work. Remember what greenhouse effect is. A lot more of the heat is captured inside the building. So if you can, now you can imagine if so much heat is reflected that it can melt a car, imagine the amount of heat is captured inside the building. So when you look at a glass skyscraper, you are only appreciating it for how beautiful it looks and it's so pleasing to the eye and you want a commercial real estate there. But what happens really inside a glass skyscraper? So this is an interview that was reported. It says we build a glass skyscraper and then have to cool that glass skyscraper because all of that heat that is trapped in, which uses energy, which contributes to the climate crisis, which increases the temperature. So this is one of the classic vicious cycles that you talk of when you talk of climate change. So you trap a lot of heat energy, you then employ air conditioning or whatever method that you do employ, that increases CFCs, greenhouse gases, which contributes to climate change. The hotter the weather makes the glass building even harder to cool. But we have to keep cooling it because sweaty co-workers are not happy co-workers, and so the cycle goes on. Now, one thing that really intrigues me in this interview is that it says the point is that with responsible architecture, you can keep people cool without unnecessary cooling. So why did we get to skyscrapers? That's a question that's worthy of being asked. The answer to it is quite simple, and Yuval Noah Harari has quite explained it quite well in Sapiens. So people were nomads earlier, and then they started moving around. They had been moving around. They started settling in when they discovered agriculture. When they discovered agriculture, they realized that we have enough food to feed ourselves. So let's employ ourselves elsewhere. Those congregations became more and more dense because now there was employment, because they did not have to worry about food. Once those congregations become so full of employment that there were people pouring in, they turned into metros that we see today around us everywhere. But because so many people came and the carrying capacity of that piece of land was only so much, the property was limited, the land was limited, the supply of property went down, the demand of property went up, the valuation of property went up, right? So if there is lack of property, what do you usually do? If there's lack of land, what do you usually do? You start adding stories, right? You make it a skyscraper, which is what we were talking about. So if you have made it into a skyscraper, should there be a policy to govern it? Because you take Mumbai as an example, okay, or any other island city as an example. But we'll take Mumbai as an example because it's hard to cover everything. The island part of Mumbai is only limited in its landmass. And with the amount of population that stays there, imagine if you allowed for 100 stories to come up everywhere. Imagine the amount of load that would put on the carrying capacity of that piece of land. Just don't even think about the natural resources generally. Think about the waste that will be generated for that land to subsist. And that's why you need to have a policy that limits your floor area ratio. And that's where we jump in more towards a policy that seems unrelated to environment, but has immense environmental consequences. So for those of you who do not know, as I said, I'm going to be starting at ground zero. FAR or FSI, as it's called, is basically the ratio of your built up area divided, ratio of your built up area with the square footage of your total land. So to put it simply, if your FAR is 1 and you own 1 square meters of land and your FAR is 1, you can have 1 square meters of built up area. All right. So if your FAR is 2 here, then you can have 2 square meters of area built on this 1 square meters of land. Similarly, if it's 1.5, you can have 1.5 square meters of built up area on 1 square meter of land. So on and so forth. And then there are other concepts that we discussed during the fellowship. Why are we talking about FSI and BCR in ecological economics or environmental economics or economics of beneficiary-based principle? And all I'd say is you just have to bear with me and it'll all come together in 15 minutes from now. But since we're talking about FSI and FAR, and we're talking about how 1.5 FAR means 1 square meters of built up area on 1 square meter of land, let's look at India's cities and their FARs. Okay, this is Ahmedabad, goes up to 1.8. Bangalore goes up, Bengaluru goes up to 3.35, Chennai goes up to 3.5, Delhi goes up to 4, Gurgaon goes up to 1.5, so on and so forth. I wanted to have a look at the island city of Mumbai. Now I was referring to, one second. I was referring to how we're going to take Mumbai as an example. And we're talking about the island bit of Mumbai, not Thane, not elsewhere. So if 1.33 is the FAR in Mumbai, that means if you own a land that's 1 square meters, you can have a built up area of 1.33 square meters within the island city, within the island region of Mumbai. And this is decided by a policy that is very well laid out. It is included in the master plan of every city. And this isn't just limited to Mumbai again. It happens across the globe, across cities. I'm just taking Mumbai as an example. So 1.3. Now put it in contrast. All of us agree that Mumbai is one of the major metropolitan regions of the world. 1.3 is where Mumbai makes it. You compare it to other Indian cities here. But better still, compare it to global metros, which Mumbai is. Look at Hong Kong, which is around 12, Chicago, which is around 12, New York, which is around 15, Singapore is around 25. I could not even fit it into my slide. So the FAR of Mumbai was decided by a tangentially unrelated policy dealing with land, probably not having anything to do with environment, or maybe it did. That's why the FAR was kept as low as 1.3, because people were concerned that the carrying capacity of Mumbai's natural resources might not be able to take so much population if we increase it. But remember the point I'm trying to make here. The point I'm trying to make here, sometimes unrelated policies have major environmental impacts, impacts that you will try and value, impacts that you cannot try and value, impacts that you cannot value inherently. So you remember 1.3 is the FAR of Mumbai, which means 1.3 square meters of built up area on 1 square meters of land. I'm going to throw a couple of numbers at all of you just to check if you're engaged or not. What do you think these two figures are? All right, let me, since we're talking in the context of Mumbai, can anyone guess what 48 square feet is? Srishti, we're still discussing the issue of glass skyscrapers. It's not resolved yet. Okay, so 48 square feet is the average floor space available to each person in the city of Mumbai. Average floor space available to each person within the island part of Mumbai. What is 50 square feet? Let's see. 50 square feet is the average floor space of a prison cell in the US, federally demanded. So today, the average floor space of a prison cell in the US is higher than the average floor space per person in Mumbai. And that should give you an example of the space constraints we're dealing with. That should give you an example of how policies have an impact on our everyday lives. And we'll discuss how they have an impact on environment now, because that's what we're here for. Now, if there's such little space, what happens? The rents go up, right? People would want to pay more to stay in Mumbai because there's limited space. But not everyone's able to pay the kind of rents that South Bombay demands. So what do? You go to slums. That increases slums. Some people might not want to stay in slums. So what do? You set up suburbs. You go to Thane, you go to Mathiran, you go to Pune. But if you have set up suburbs and now you have to go to and fro from Mumbai every day, what do? The government now has to establish, or private companies now have to establish, or private individuals now have to establish transportation. So now you're looking at so many impacts due to a policy that regulates the floor space index of a city that did not seem very related to environment, or if it did, it was not foreseen that these are the kind of environmental impacts that that one policy has. Now, if you think that rents going up leads to slums and suburban sprawl and transportation, so what? So what is exactly this? All of these are environmental impacts. And we're talking about tangible environmental impacts from a policy that was seemingly unrelated. And let's go back to the economic side of it. Let's talk about valuation. We know that slums that perhaps came up, or at least tangentially were related to coming up because of the FSI policy. Slums came up because there was no space to live in those legitimate properties in Mumbai or elsewhere in India or elsewhere in the world, because I've also taken the example of Kaibera slum in Kenya, where HIV infection is twice the national average. Diarrhea is the leading killer of children under 5. What is it that I'm trying to prove here? That one decision has a cascading effect on so many other policy decisions, valuation of which is often not reflected in the actual impact of that policy decision. So you have to spend on public health infrastructure, you have to spend on environmental infrastructure, you have to spend on education, there are social and cultural barriers. Imagine Dharavi, which is a slum of Mumbai, for those of you who are not from India, has almost 3 lakh people, 300,000 people within 1 square kilometer of area. That's the kind of load you're putting on the carrying capacity, which you try to save by having a lower FSI. But you can still put dollar figure to it. You can say that this is how much I spend in public health infrastructure of that slum. This is how much I spent on education system, this is how much I spent on waste management, all of those, you come up with a dollar figure. Has that been accounted for when you're drafting the FSI policy? Probably not. Jury's still out. What about suburban sprawls? Now, suburbs do not come from nowhere. These were either agricultural lands or forest lands or lands for other uses, which were then changed for residential purposes or industrial purposes. And this keeps on happening on an everyday basis. We've seen the example of trees being cut to accommodate suburbs. So suburbs can also be valued. If you can think of how much cost is of that one tree that you cut and then extrapolate it across forests that have been cut, and the rehabilitation mechanism and the amount of money that was spent to build flats, so on and so forth, and you can come up with a dollar figure. What about transportation? What about now the government having to build a local or a metro or a cube that connects that suburb to the main city? And we all know about the environmental impacts of transportation. There are direct impacts that includes noise, carbon monoxide, so on and so forth. There are indirect impacts which happen to environmental systems. So incomplete combustion of ICEs, respiratory cardiovascular diseases, all of those. There are cumulative impacts that we all know of and we see on an everyday basis. But again, these things can be valued. You can attach a dollar figure to these things. Have we thought about the valuation of things that we have not got down to a dollar figure? What about the unliquidated damages? Are they our greatest challenge? And I will quickly rush through this because all of you have been extremely patient. But I want to leave you with a couple of valuation challenges to show you how an innocent policy about FSI, floor area ratios, floor space index, could have the kind of impacts that it does. Now imagine, actually I'll leave the imagination for now. Let me take you through the two studies that I have for you. There was a study conducted in the US. The title of the study was The Impact of Indoor Climate on Human Cognition, Evidence from Chess Tournaments, a working paper. The paper studied the impact of environmental quality on the performance of individuals undertaking cognitively demanding tasks under time pressure. And this is the important bit. Cognitively demanding tasks under time pressure. These people, these chess players were highly focused, right? They were running against time. They had to make extremely sound cognitive decisions. What was the result of the study? So basically what they did, they checked the indoor pollution across various rooms where chess tournaments were being conducted, and they extrapolated it and they saw what were the amount of errors made by these chess players on account of the air pollution. It showed that a 10 microgram per cubic meter increase in PM 2.5 results in a 1.5 percentage point increase in the probability of a player making a meaningful error with 10%, almost 10% larger errors. So 10 micrograms per cubic meter of increase in PM 2.5 in your indoor pollution gives you a chance of making 10% larger errors. And this was noted across chess players. But you might think that, all right, I'm not a chess player. I'm not even an indoor person. I like being outside. In that case, I have another study. This was done on baseball umpires for outdoor pollution. The name of the study, Air Quality and Error Quantity, Pollution Performance in a High Skill Quality Focused Occupation. Now, this was the study that provided the first evidence that short-term exposure to air pollution affects the work performance of a group of highly skilled quality focused employees. And again, remember these terms, like you saw on the last slide, cognitively demanding tasks under pressure, and highly skilled quality focused employees. Now, it was repeatedly observed that decision-making of individual professional baseball players quasi-randomly assigned to varying air quality across time and space diminished. Found that 1 parts per million increase in carbon monoxide in a 3-hour window causes an 11.5% increase in propensity of umpires to make incorrect calls, and so on and so forth. Now, what I'm leaving you with is, we can still plan for valuation of slums or suburban sprawls or transportation. But what about the errors that are being caused to the decision making of a baseball umpire, to the decision making of a chess player? And you're absolutely right if you say that, why do I care about baseball umpires? I don't play baseball. I don't watch baseball. Why do I care about chess players? I don't play chess. I play it online these days. The reason why you should care is because you should go back to what I was talking about and trying to specify to all of you. These are time sensitive, highly focused, cognitively engaged professions. Now extrapolate those professions. Think of stock market brokers. Think of air traffic controllers. Think of doctors, surgeons. Think of miners. Think of students who's sitting in their examination hall thinking that, why have I absolutely blanked out here? Not knowing that it could be because of the air pollution, that their cognitive abilities are diminishing. But there are so many other effects of this. If you want to go into the cascading effects of that FSI policy, think of it in these terms. There's a surgeon who's operating, time sensitive, cognitively engaged, focused. The indoor air pollution of that operation theater is high, or if that hospital is high, and he commits a mistake. And the patient suffers, and the patient sues, and the patient is awarded damages of, hypothetically speaking, $2,000. Now, would the surgeon pay for those damages because the court required him to, or her to? If not, should the government pay because it was because of the FSI policy that the indoor pollution was high, because of which cognitive errors happened on the side of the surgeon? And these are some of the valuation challenges that happen when you're dealing with policies that do not even seem to touch upon sustainability directly. And these are some of the things that we deal with at the GPOTS Fellowship. I hope you guys had an engaging session throughout the evening. I implore all of you to write to us directly, reach out to us. We're happy to discuss these things separately as well. And please do check out the GPOTS Fellowship. The website is in the chat box. Finally, bit of a request to all of you. These are testing times for all of us. You had an earlier lecture which was delivered by someone who is struggling with COVID as we speak. And please do reach out to other people. Please offer help. And if you cannot, that's all right. I ask of all of you to be kind in these times, because you never know what the other person is going through. So let's try and stay kind towards each other as a group. And I hope to see you all at the GPOTS Fellowship. And please do reach out to us in case of any queries. I had a wonderful time, and thank you for joining in. For those of you who have attended over Zoom, you will be receiving your certificates within a week and a half from today. So please do not worry, you will receive it by the end of 2 weeks. And for those of you who did not attend it on Zoom, or who have been attending on Facebook Live, I hope you enjoyed the session. And while certificates might not be possible for those of you who are attending on Zoom, and that's for attending on Facebook, and that's why we sent out an email saying that there's limited capacity, we would make sure that we let you know of any further events that happen of EnviPol, and we would invite all of you to attend again. It was a pleasure having you, and let's keep the conversation going about sustainability and youth engagement. And thank you to each of you for attending.